All right, we're at about 5 minutes over. We're at 12:05, and I do want to try to keep us on time as best we can to look at keeping us within our 4-hour block. I do appreciate everybody taking the time to come sit with us for the Defense and State Memorandum of Agreement, DSMOA 101 webinar. Hope you all are having a wonderful day fighting with teams. Hopefully we can keep that to a minimum. We do have support folks that if you reach out, they will try to facilitate some solutions. I'm not sure that we can facilitate all the solutions, but we'll try. Myself, I'm Brian Jordan with OSD, with the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environmental Management and Restoration. And I'm joined by my colleague, Susan Elrod. If Susan wants to come off camera quickly to introduce herself, that'd be awesome. Oh, Susan, you're muted.
Try one more time.
There you go.
Hi, my name's Susan Elrod. I'm very excited to be joining the team and just look forward to the training today. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Susan. We're happy to have such a diverse crowd here today and look forward to providing you with an engaging and informative webinar. We have about 311 state representatives and 186 DoD representatives registered. And I think that actually those numbers went up after I had these plugged into my script. So, but do appreciate all of you taking the time to attend. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE, developed this presentation to provide an overview of DoD's DSMOA program and the steps to establish and execute a cooperative agreement. This presentation will provide useful information to regulators and interested stakeholders, especially for new personnel who may not be as familiar with DoD's cleanup program. All right, next slide. All right, run through the agenda. So today I'll provide a general history and overview of the DERP and DERP eligibility, explain DERP funding, and describe the DERP process in that very first section. So this would be an overview, something that was, if you took our DERP 101 presentation that DSMOA put on, you'll see very similar activities in that opening overview. And then Rena Flint, with the DSMOA National, who's the DSMOA National Program Manager with USACE, and Miss Katie Reeve, the Regulatory Specialist with USACE, will be reviewing the DSMOA program, the CA 6-step process, and the post-CA award period, with valuable inputs and perspectives on each section by our state and DoD speakers. Who are all actively working on DSMOA program. I'll introduce all the speakers in the next slide. So again, this is kind of a run through. You'll notice that I have closing remarks at the end. I didn't say next slide yet, but that's okay. She's hurrying me along. But we will have a closing remarks section, and that will also be a little bit of a, I just highlight that if you want to skip the test at the end, we'll be running back through some of the key points and trying to do some knowledge check stuff during the closing remarks. So if you like to bail out before the test, you might want to do that before my closing remarks. I'll try to keep it as fun, as enlightening as possible. Hopefully I'll get a few laughs out of it, but we will try to do that at the end as well. Now, next slide. Thank you, Radima. So here are state and DoD partners that are also speaking. I'll introduce the first from the state of South Carolina, Stacy French, PE. She is the director of the Division of Waste Management at the South Carolina Department of Environmental Services. She has worked with the DSMOA program for over 27 years. Yeah, we should be giving a lot of claps for Stacy's dedication, 27 years on DSMOA, helping federal facilities navigate permitting and corrective action requirements. She started her career as a project manager at various Department of Defense facilities in South Carolina, responsible for Resource Conservation and Recovery Act permitting and RCRA and Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA integration, with the common goal of site investigation and cleanup. Our next one, State of South Dakota, Mark Lorenzen, is an environmental specialist for the state of South Dakota. He works in the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources as the state Superfund and DSMOA program manager. He has experience with all aspects of the DSMOA cooperative agreement process and DoD environmental work. And then our last one from Army component, and he's the Army component alternate, is Justin Gonzalez, is an environmental scientist with U.S. Army Environmental Command, or AEC, and serves as the program manager for the DSMOA program. In his role, he oversees the DSMOA 6-step process for active Army and National Guard sites. In addition to his DSMOA responsibility, serves as a cost estimating software program manager and the Army National Guard liaison. All right, next slide. So from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have Katie Reed has been with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers since 1998, resulting in over 26 years of experience working with environmental laws and regulations. Her experience includes the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, Natural Resource Management, Section 106 compliance, Land Use Management Plans, Water Resources, Endangered Species Act, and Hazardous Materials Management. Ms. Reed currently works as a DSMOA program liaison, primarily administering CAs for states and territories on behalf of the Department of Defense, and providing technical support to states, territories, headquarters, USACE, Army, Air Force, Navy, DLA, and Office of the Secretary of Defense. So I get listed last, but that's perfect. So Katie helps all those organizations work through and facilitates this DSMOA program. And then last but not least, we have the DSMOA National Program Manager coming from headquarters USACE. So that's Rena Flint in her new position. Gennardi already has her hand up, but that's okay. Rena Flint has been with the Corps of Engineers since 2018, working in environmental restoration under the formerly used Defense Site Program and the Native American Lands Environmental Mitigation Program, or NALIP, a cooperative agreement plan, a program as well. She has also worked as a hydrogeologist in support of a wide variety of environmental projects. She has a BS in environmental science from the University of Florida. Ms. Flint is currently the DSMOA National Program Manager. As the DSMOA NPM, she facilitates the partnership framework for states, territories, and DoD components to cooperate to expedite the remediation process at installations and flood projects. All right, next slide. All right, so this slide, just a quick history. Now, this doesn't capture every milestone because you could probably, for the DERP program, get all the way down to each phase completion is a milestone for DERP, right, to get us through each CERCLA phase. But this slide contains 6 major milestones in the history of DERP. The department started its cleanup program way back in 1975 with the establishment of the Installation Restoration Program, or IRP. This was before the 1980 passage of the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, also known as Superfund, and a decade before CERCLA was applied to all federal agencies. In 1980, Congress passed CERCLA, which requires responsible parties to clean up hazardous substances released to the environment resulting from past practices. In 1986, Congress passed the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, or SARA, which extended CERCLA to federal facilities, formally established the Defense Environmental Restoration Account, and authorized the Secretary of Defense to carry out the restoration program at installations under the Secretary's jurisdiction. In 1987, President signed Executive Order 12580, Superfund implementation, which delegated the President's CERCLA authority to the Secretary of Defense to respond to releases or threatened releases where either the release is on or the sole source of the releases from any facility or vessel under the jurisdiction, custody, or control of the DoD. The DoD is a lead agency with the delegated authority to plan and implement response actions under CERCLA and the National Oil and Hazardous Substances Pollution Contingency Plan, or NCP. In 1996, the Federal Facilities Environmental Restoration Dialogue Committee issued a report considered a blueprint for all stakeholders. The public, regulators, and regulatory agencies of recommendations aimed at improving the process of making cleanup decisions and priorities of federal facilities. The dialogue set a high standard for public participation and serves as a model for environmental dialogues. In 2001, based on the legal authority in 10 U.S. Code 2710, DoD established the Military Munitions Response Program to address defense sites, and i.e. former ranges, known or suspected to contain unexploded ordnance, discarded military munitions, or munitions constituents. These sites are referred to as munitions response sites, or MRSs. Next slide. So DoD conducts cleanup under CERCLA and DERP authorities. The specific statutes are listed in the footnotes on the slide. Some of those may be a little hard to read. Hopefully you have a big monitor so you can see those. Again, we will be posting slides on the DNext webpage after this, shortly after this webinar. These provide standard practices for the identification, investigation, and cleanup of releases and military munitions associated with activities at DoD facilities. DERP addresses cleanup at active installations, formerly used defense sites or FUDS properties, and base realignment and closure, or BRAC locations. Active installations are currently in service and being regularly used for military activities. FUDS properties are properties that are under the jurisdiction, or that were under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of Defense and owned by, leased to, or otherwise possessed by the U.S. at the time of actions leading to contamination by hazardous substances and transferred from DoD control prior to October 17, 1986. BRAC locations are installations that are being or have been closed or are being realigned by BRAC, but are still under the jurisdiction of the DoD, and those properties that have been transferred out of the DoD by the BRAC process, but where the DoD retained restoration responsibilities. Response actions pursuant to DERP must be in accordance with CERCLA. DoD may conduct environmental restoration pursuant to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, but DoD still must follow all the CERCLA requirements. So I think that's a key point here. And Stacy will talk, a lot of her experience is conducting RCRA type cleanup or corrective actions. But really when DoD is executing that work under RCRA, we're still needing to meet all of our CERCLA requirements, because that's really where our authorities come from. All right, next slide. Talk a little bit about DERP eligibility and what is DERP eligible. So Congress drafted the DERP statutory language to describe specifically what cleanup was and was not eligible for DERP. Because DoD can only use environmental restoration or ER account funds to pay for activities specifically authorized by Congress, i.e. DERP activities, it's important to understand what activities are and are not eligible for DERP. DERP includes response actions undertaken by a DoD component to address releases caused by past DoD activities within the U.S. This slide contains a list of DERP eligible activities. I think it's important that I read these for you. A release of a hazardous substance or pollutant or contaminant, a release of petroleum, oil, or lubricants, a release of hazardous waste or a hazardous waste constituent, and then UXO, DMM, or MC at MRSs. All right, we'll move on to funding. Next slide. So DERP funding. In addition to authorizing activities, Congress must also appropriate specific funds from the U.S. Treasury for those activities. So funding for DERP activities comes from 6 accounts subject to congressional funding. There are 5 environmental restoration accounts: Army, and I'll list them off for you here: Army, Navy, Air Force, FUDs, and then the defense-wide, including non-BRAC funding for the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environmental Management and Restoration, that's me, as well as funding for DLA and the Defense Logistics Agency and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA. There is one BRAC account for legacy BRAC and BRAC 2005 accounts that Congress combined in the fiscal year 2013. So in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. Congress provides ER accounts funding in annual or single year appropriations. Agencies must spend annual appropriation funds during one fiscal year. The federal fiscal year is from October 1st to September 30th. So we're now in October 23rd. We're 23 days removed from our changeover of our fiscal year. BRAC funding is available for up to 5 years. All right, next slide is a quick check-in. So we will pose the questions to you, and my ask is that we use the chat functionality. So this is a good time for you to be able to use that chat. And I'm going to ask both questions with their respective multiple choice answers. So why is 1986 an important date in DERP program? And then I'll give you the answers that are available. And then we can provide the next question. So I'll be asking 2 questions in here. How many funding accounts pay for DERP activities? So I know I see some of you are jumping through with the answer really quick, but I need the answer to both of them. So I see a lot of C's and then a comma and then the second one. So if you want to, how many funding accounts pay for the DERP activities? Perfect. 1 and 2. I'm seeing a lot of C and C, so that's awesome. So go ahead and we'll reveal those answers. So Sarah was passed by Congress. I was already in high school, but just barely in 1986. How many funding accounts? 1, 4, 6, 10. So 6 is the correct answer for the DERP activities. All right. Well, thank you for participating with me, playing a little along with that chat. We'll be trying to mimic this process a little bit. It might be true or false or multiple choice, but as we go, we'll try to engage you in that way. So slides, I see that roll through in there. So slides we'll be posting to the DNEX website. So the DSMOA page of the DNEX website. So DERP process in general. The next several slides provide important information on the DERP CERCLA process. I'm going to talk about the DERP process generally, but spend most of my time talking about partnerships and transparency, how we successfully collaborate with regulators and other stakeholders. Because I think many of you would agree that it would be a very difficult process for DoD to work through the CERCLA or corrective action without that collaboration with our many stakeholders, and most definitely that collaboration needing to be with our regulators. DoD follows the CERCLA process to fully investigate releases, prioritize responses, and determine appropriate cleanup actions based on risk to human health and the environment. CERCLA provides a consistent approach across the nation for cleanup. DERP provides authorities to DoD to perform and fund these actions, and requires they be carried out in accordance with CERCLA. DoD tailors the actual sequence, timing, and scope of cleanup actions to site-specific conditions and funding priorities. The department prioritizes resources and addresses sites where the risk to human health is the highest. I think it's an important statement, and I'll read it again. The department prioritizes resources and addresses sites where the risk to human health is the highest. So very important. Removal actions can occur at any point throughout the cleanup process for a situation requiring a more immediate response. As DoD moves through the CERCLA process, the department works in collaboration with federal and state regulatory agencies, communities, and facilities to ensure open and transparent information sharing. Next slide. So here's a layout of the CERCLA process. So the DoD components use the major environmental relation process phases and milestones illustrated here. Should be very familiar to most of us that have a good basis in CERCLA. The investigation process includes preliminary assessment, site inspection, remedial investigation and feasibility study phases, resulting in the record of decision or a decision document, a DD. The cleanup process includes remedial design, remedial action construction, and remedial action operation, resulting in remedy in place or response complete. The department measures cleanup progress against the RC milestone or response complete milestone, which occurs when cleanup activities are complete, and DoD has documented this determination and sought regulatory agreement, although DoD or a subsequent landowner may continue to monitor the site. The process ends with the site closeout when DoD has completed the required response actions at an environmental restoration site and no further long-term management is required. Some sites may remain in the long-term management phase for an extended period of time. Sites also do not have to progress through all CERCLA phases. For example, some sites may not require RAO or long-term management if response actions completed during the remedial design and construction phases meet the remedial action objectives identified in the ROD or DD. A site does not have to go through every DERP phase to achieve RC. For example, the investigation may determine the cleanup is not required. All right, next slide. Partnership and transparency. I think a good signal of that is how many folks have joined us today in wanting to hear this message and trying to strengthen this partnership and transparency. So DoD's partnerships are fundamental to DERP's success and often expedite cleanup at DoD installations and FUDS properties through the effective planning and implementation. DoD partners with communities, states, and local governments and other federal agencies throughout the cleanup process to maximize transparency, public participation, and collaboration. These successful and lasting partnerships are vital to DoD for minimizing conflicts, achieving cleanup goals, streamlining processes, reducing cleanup costs and timeframes, and ensuring efficient use of resources. So I'll provide a quick example. DoD, this is for a non-public site. So DoD enters interagency agreements or federal facility agreements to facilitate cooperation, exchange of information, the participation of U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and as appropriate, the state in the environmental restoration process. Another example of this is the DSMOA Steering Committee fosters communication and collaboration between representatives from the Office of Secretary of Defense, the DoD components, and state environmental regulators. Representatives use their expertise or experiences and expertise to exchange views, information, and advice to address issues related to managing and implementing the DSMOA program and DERP. The Emissions Response Dialogue, or the MRD. This is one that I lead, consists of representatives from OSD, the DoD components, EPA, state regulators, federal land managers, and representatives in MRD are bringing their experience and expertise to talk and advise concerning managing and implementing the military munitions response program. And then in particular, we have the FUDS Forum Working Group, which is also one that I manage, where we bring the similar folks together to talk issues specific to the FUDS program. So those are some examples of where we see this transparency and collaboration really working out well. We have the DERP Forum. So many of you may have attended the DERP Forum in 2023, which we brought together 221 folks from DoD, EPA, the FLMs, and states to discuss our cleanup issues. And I will let you all know if you're not aware yet, but the next DERP Forum is scheduled for May 6th through the 8th, 2025. So next May in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we will be going back to Pittsburgh. If some of you had attended the FUDS Forum, we were just there in 2023, but we'll be going back to Pittsburgh in May. FUDS, I see that there. So yeah, I used, and Rena threw that in there, formerly used defense sites. Thank you, Rena. So what are some of the public ways that we do collaboration and transparency? So we have restoration advisory boards, provide a forum for community and government agencies, tribes, and installation decision makers to provide input on and discuss cleanup activities at active installations, BRAC locations, and FUDS properties. For example, RAB participants review environmental cleanup progress and provide input to installation decision makers. And then we also have the Technical Assistance for Public Participation Program, or TAP program, provides communities with independent technical assistance that contributes to the public's ability to provide advice to decision makers by improving the public's understanding of the conditions and related cleanup activities at a site. Specifically, the TAP program helps RAB members better understand the scientific and engineering issues underlying environmental cleanup activities. So speaking of direct planning documents that we put together, and we generally put this together at the very beginning of a remedial investigation phase, the NCP requires that DoD prepare a community involvement plan, or a CIP or SIP, based on community interviews and other relevant information, specifying the community relations activities that the lead agency expects to undertake during the remedial response. DoD CIPs advocate and strengthen early and meaningful community participation throughout the CERCLA process and enable community members to understand the ways in which they can participate in decision-making throughout the site cleanup process. And you may have noticed that with PFAS and many sites that have been active, so the site was started for the site, or the installation was very engaged with environmental cleanup activities 20 years ago for TCE, but now, and that progressed through and worked its way through the multiple phases of the CERCLA cleanup program, that we're now, with PFAS coming on board, we're needing to update those CIPs. So you will see that many of our sites are looking to update our community involvement plans, because the way we communicate and the different processes we engage the public have changed. No longer can we count on a newspaper listing getting to everybody, for sure. All right, next slide, quick check-in. Test your knowledge again. So it'd be a 2-question answer. So if you want to hold up on answering that first question, and then we will, so which of the following groups is not a partner with DERP cleanup? Sierra Club, FUDS Forum, DSMOA Steering Committee, or MRD? And then number 2, which of the 3 categories that DERP sites fall into will most likely have an extended long-term management component? This one's a little bit of a test. Installation restoration program, building demolition and debris removal, or C, MMRP, which is military munitions response program. C, A, and A. See, so I see a lot of us have the Sierra Club part. A few of us are getting the number 2, which of the 3 categories that DERP sites fall into will most likely have an extended long-term management component. I didn't highlight this, so this is, I'm testing all my MMRP folks out there because they understand that military munitions, it's very difficult to get to 100% on the cleanup aspect of a military munitions item, as one item could lead to a catastrophic event. So the answers to this are A and C, because many MMRP projects will need to carry forward. All right, we have come to our first break for questions, and we will pause here for any, if there are any queued up Q&As for myself, or if somebody does want to come off mute, we'll try to facilitate that. I'm going to have to count on my webinar expertise of Booz Allen to unmute folks if that's at all possible. Uh-oh.
So there were no questions in the Q&A, but this one was from the chat. Is the
Sure.
BRAC fund appropriation available for 5 fiscal years, but the ER appropriation are available only for 1 fiscal year?
Correct. Yes. That's why you will see that the BRAC funding has a little more flexibility as to how it can be used over a period of time. Though, not to get too heavily into how the opportunity to use the money in the fiscal year, so that 1 year money can be placed onto a contract, and then that contract can last upwards of 5 years. So that money, it must be placed or committed to a contract, and then it gets used over time. That's why you see a lot of our work is performed through contract. That way we can take advantage of the money is committed to the contract, and then it gets used over the next 4 years. But its ultimate expiration is 5 years for even that 1 year money. But as long as it's on contract, it can still get used. Yeah, they're not on, Jane, they are not posted on the website yet. So the slides will not be posted until after the presentation. So Redima, do you want to go to the next slide? So here's the page where those slides will get posted. And for additional information, this also has the save the date for the DERP forum that's going to occur, as I mentioned, May 6th through 8th in lovely Pittsburgh. So folks should be reaching out to the states, particularly for our state attendants. That will come through ITSWAMO. So be talking to your ITSWAMO coordinator within your state and or your POC for ITSWAMO, and they should be able to, you can get yourself added to the list or in some way, there's limited attendance, so there might be an arm wrestling match to get there, but yeah. No, so the question is DSMOA money for agencies available for longer than the 2-year cycle? That's really a Katie question. And so she will be talking about the cycle here in the next few slides, probably 20 slides from now. But there is a definitive reason, because of the authorities that we have. That's why the DSMOA is under the 2-year cycle, and you'll notice that it gets funded with yearly money for 1 year money. But Katie will cover that a little later.
Ryan, we have another question in the chat if you have time for another one.
Sure.
Someone asked, can you give an example of the technical assistance for public participation program?
I will, but I'm having to reach back a little bit because it has been a while. The TAP program, or technical assistance program, was not highly advertised out to the communities. So in the past, a RAB has reached out, and RABs currently continue to reach out, and it is to provide additional technical resources of their choosing, right? So they come in with a vendor, or and I say vendor, a contractor, or it could be a university staff. It could be somebody they trust, and they come back to DoD and then and say, I need their support for specific tasks to review certain documents, like a risk assessment. We're not expecting the public to have a toxicologist on staff to look at a risk assessment and pull out all the salient points. And this is like an opportunity for them to get an independent look at a very technical document and provide a summary back to the RAB so that they can assist with some of that input to the decision making. Hopefully that helps with an example of that. And we do have new resources that are posted on the PFAS website, because this has become very important for our PFAS folks. As we're standing up many more RABs, or looking to stand up many more RABs, and trying to get folks technically up to speed or provide them this technical assistance in the PFAS realm. We have provided additional resources on the PFAS website for a process layout of how to get to a tap, because it wasn't readily available, and because it had been infrequently used over the last 25 years, many of the folks who had done this in the past were no longer with the department. So it was always like, oh, how do we do this? And so now those resources are on the PFAS website. We do still meet with US EPA quarterly. That's usually a meeting that's scheduled between OSD and EMR, or my office, and senior leadership, as well as with the FIFRO office. And then they bring in their counterparts from their regional offices, and we bring in the component heads at the headquarters level. All right. And I think next up is DSMOA 101.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Katie. So ahead of Katie's more in-depth discussion with you all today, I'll be giving an overview of this training. So next slide, please. My name is Rena Flint. I'm with the USACE headquarters, and my right hand for the DSMOA program is Ms. Katie Reed, who will be talking more in depth on the program. As DSMOA National Program Manager, or NPM, as you may see it on following slides, my primary role is really a connector. So I'll be a connector to people and to information. I serve as the lead agent, which is delegated through Army to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I'll be that connector to people and information between the states and the DoD components to the DSMOA team. And that DSMOA team is referenced below. The overarching objective is in order to minimize disputes and expedite review process, and therefore expedite cleanup operations on military installations and also FUD sites, which in DSMOA, we'll get into it, but the joint execution plans have installations as well as FUDs properties. And as DSMOA National Program Manager, I'm responsible for executing the program within program goals achieved through the 6-step process, as detailed in the Cooperative Agreement Guide, or CA Guide. And we'll be going through that 6-step process throughout this presentation in detail. Next slide, please. Course outline. So, okay, so we're going to look at DSMOA basics. What is DSMOA and the DSMOA community? And then we'll be taking a deep dive into the CA. DSMOA development through the 6-step process, and then the execution of the CA and closing out. Next slide, please. DSMOA basics. Okay, so DSMOA, the program, was established under SARA, or Superfunded Amendment and Reauthorization Act, in 1986 in order to expedite environmental restoration at active installations, National Guard facilities, BRAC, FUDs, through financial reimbursement of eligible activities. The DSMOA program provides a construct for, namely, resolving disputes and enhances cooperation and understanding. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was an overview of the program, DSMOA. The actual Memorandum of Agreement, or DSMOA, is an agreement between DoD and a state or territory. It's jointly signed, and it provides a vehicle for funding, the cooperative agreement provides the vehicle for funding for eligible activities under the DSMOA program. Next slide, please. An overview of who we all are on the line here today. So the DSMOA community. The DSMOA community is made up of DSMOA components, including Army, Air Force, Navy, DLA, FUDs, and 52 states and territories, as shown in black. And there are a handful of states and territories without a Memorandum of Agreement, as shown in gray. And that wraps up my overview of the DSMOA 101, and I just wanted to say that I really look forward to collaborating with all of you on the newly awarded 22 through 24 CAs and throughout the execution of those cooperative agreements, and also in person and through virtual engagements ahead of the May upcoming pre-6-step process kickoff for the 26 to 28 CAs. And that will all make a lot more sense in the handful of next slides.
Rena, I noticed in the chat, I think there's a good question. Why are there a handful?
Okay.
Why are there not a DSMOA with a handful of states? And maybe Rena, you could answer that, or if you want to kick that to Katie, that'd be great too.
Okay, I could take a stab at the overarching overview and then kick to Katie for details. But so a handful of states have not entered into a Memorandum of Agreement, and states and territories, because they have not come to agreement with the terms in that MOA. And then, I don't know, Katie, if you want to give maybe an example of what some of the hiccups are, or if there's anything you want to follow on to that.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Raina. I can say that for Virgin Islands in North Dakota, they have a very small cleanup program. And since the cooperative agreement development process it's a heavy lift, it's a year-long process, it's just not economical for them to put a DSMOA in place. They prefer to work with their very limited components in that respect. So North Dakota will probably never join DSMOA, nor should they, because they have that worked out already. Same with Virgin Islands. Arkansas, I have no idea why they didn't put one in place originally. They just chose not to participate. And then Washington State had a DSMOA in place before my time. And then there were some conflicts and they terminated their DSMOA. But I know that Chris is out there with Washington State listening in right now, and we are working towards establishing a DSMOA with them. And the same holds true for Arkansas. Over.
Yeah, and I'll come back on camera. I will just say that Arkansas's DSMOA CA is in, or the big overarching CA is in with the OSD for signature right now. So as soon as we can get that done, then we can start moving Arkansas forward with the preparation of JEPs and those pieces. And hopefully soon I'll be able to announce that for Washington State as well, because we'd really love to have them back into the DSMOA program. I think it could alleviate some of the friction that we are currently having. And I wouldn't say it's not open friction, but it's just a way to manage. We have a lot of work, cleanup activities and other activities happening in Washington that I really think that if we could get them back into DSMOA, it would really help facilitate the collaboration with the state of Washington.
Okay, so next slide, turning it over to Miss Katie Reed for a deeper dive into DSMOA. Thank you.
Okay, camera coming back on. Hello, everybody. I've talked with so many of you over the years. And like I said, Katie Reed, I'm a DSMOA state manager, DSMOA liaison, and I like to start out with the cooperative agreement basics. And just because sometimes there's some confusion, when we talk to the state side, there's a perception that they lean more towards a grant style. And if you talk to the DoD side, you know, we do a lot of contracts and things like that. So there's a bend towards being biased towards a contract, but a cooperative agreement is neither. It is, some people will view it as more kind of a soft and squishy thing. We're providing funds for services to facilitate expediting our environmental reviews to get us to that conclusion. Next slide, please. So our cooperative agreement basics, all cooperative agreements throughout the U.S. government, not just military, contains a statement of purpose. It has the period of performance and the funding amount. That's going to be seen in the cooperative agreement attachment B. It's a description of work that has to be included, and your description of works are equivalent to each and every joint execution plan or JEP that is included. Of course, you have to have your POCs identified, as states know very well, and then any other relevant information contained within it. And all the requirements are subject to the Dodgers, or the Department of Defense, grants and agreement regulations, but it's not subject to the FAR. That is specifically for contracts. Next slide, please. And by the way, if you notice me looking over, because I do actually have co-presenters who are just an oasis of DSMOA information, but I also tend to overtalk. I have little notes right off to the side to make sure that I shut up and let them talk too. So Stacy, Mark, Justin, please feel free to shut me down if I get a little crazy, because I'm like DSMOA crazy. So the key differences between our cooperative agreements, grants, contracts is CA has substantial government involvement, and that is seen through how our DSMOA portal is set up. It is a back and forth collaborative tool where our DoD components propose the scope of work, the tasks they need to do to get done. And that is essentially an ask to the states saying, you know, how can you help me with this? And the states answer back with, we're going to participate in your meetings. We're going to be a part of the process from beginning to end, so that at the very end of a project, there's not any surprises. Because I don't know, I love surprises to a point, unless they're bad ones. And so we're trying to avoid the bad surprises. Of course, under the contract, that's a procurement of goods and services with hard, fast deadlines and schedules. And so that's very different. And then, of course, on the other side is the grant, where essentially it's, here's funding, go out and do what you need to do, and let us know what you find out. So it's that kind of hybrid. Next slide, please. And sorry. So what I was saying, a hybrid between the two. It is neither a contract or a grant, it's something soft and squishy in the middle. Any questions on cooperative agreements and what they represent to the community as a whole? Or Stacy, Mark, Justin, any additional comments on that? And it might take a moment to come off mute, perhaps. I don't know. If not, we will go to the next slide, please. Great. This is the slide that I want to talk about, because it is really why we use CAs as a whole. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Stacy so she can talk a little bit for her circles and go around the circle that way. So take it away, Stacy.
Okay. hopefully everybody can hear me okay. One of the first things I wanted to start out with, at the beginning, Brian mentioned I've got 27 years of experience in this program. And though I haven't been around since the very beginning of the DSMOA program, I came in just a couple of years after it really started and got rolling. So what I do have experience with is digging out of the hole of the old way of doing things in the old days. And the old days was you would get a document submitted to the state. It would stack up on people's desks. People would, state regulators would review the document, throw the comments back over the fence, and eventually get responses, and then it would stack up on somebody's desk. So it was really just, it got shuffled into the workload of every other facility that we work with. And, in our RCRA program, because our federal facilities are also in our RCRA program, it was competing for resources, not just for the federal facilities, but also for private facilities. So one of the goals of developing the DSMOA process and cooperative agreement process was so that the states could have dedicated resources to provide those services to the Department of Defense and to ultimately help expedite the document review and approval process, which, in general, the CERCLA process or the corrective action process takes years. I know there are some sites that started back when I was a project manager 27 years ago and they haven't been finished yet. But again, those are some of the hard sites, but we've made lots of progress towards that. Justin, you want to talk about the first couple of bubbles here next?
Yeah, I think I was going to touch on the trust and commitment pieces here. I will say that I think many of these components that kind of make up this project success diagram here kind of tie back to each other. We have trust, commitment, cooperation. These are really all, essential pieces to building a team and establishing working relationships. And as a former technical advisor on environmental restoration projects, I will say that the programs that ran the smoothest were always the ones where, trust had been established between the regulators and the DoD. And I think we can kind of all agree that, trust is kind of one of the most important pieces in building relationships, and winning that relationship battle is kind of, it's key in having a successful program. So the cooperative agreements and the DSMOA program helps to, build that trust between the states and DoD by, fostering collaboration and partnership and really, ensuring that everyone's perspectives are considered in the decision-making process. So I think it's important that the DSMOA POCs kind of use the DSMOA program as a tool to, bring all the stakeholders together, come to, a common understanding that we're all on the same team. We're all working towards the same goal. I think a lot of times it can get contentious and it becomes an us versus them situation, when in reality, we're all working towards the same goal. And I think we kind of make things so much harder for ourselves when we forget that notion. So also, the DSMOA program allows the stakeholders to show commitment by, establishing a formal agreement, which, provides clarity in our restoration efforts by defining the roles and responsibilities and providing, channels for communication. So by agreeing to the CA, we can, maintain that level of accountability and kind of reinforce our dedication to meeting our environmental goals, safeguarding our environment and the public health.
No, come
Very
back
good.
on.
Thanks, Justin. I think last was Mark. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stacy.
I got a couple more here. So as I mentioned, and as Brian pointed out, in South Carolina, our federal facilities also have RCRA permits. So in South Carolina, what we elected to do was try to make things easier for the Department of Defense sites. And we put all of that interaction and oversight and responsibility into our RCRA program, and as opposed to having the Department of Defense have to work within two different regulatory structures in South Carolina. So what that allows us to do is it helps us to really embrace that concept of RCRA CERCLA integration. So there are some flexibilities we have in RCRA. You know, one of my famous things that I say is it's not important necessarily what you call a document, but just making sure that you get all of the steps in both the RCRA and the circular process completed. The other thing that we can do is we have projects that also sometimes spread over some of our other regulatory programs in our other departments here at DES. Sorry. So we can act as a facilitator with those other program areas and try to help with that line of communication. That's become very, very important as we navigate through PFAS. But again, with being under the RCRA program, our ultimate goal is that we don't have DoD facilities have to double dip in which programs they're trying to meet the requirements of. Enhancing cooperation, as I mentioned, I started years ago before partnering was really a thing. It was championed in Region 4. I know we have a very robust partnering program, and it's really the motto we have is, you know, leave your hat at the door. You're not going into that team. I'm not going into that team as a DES regulator all the time. We're part of a team. The goal is to get to that common goal together. Sometimes you have to put your hat back on when, as Justin said, there's sometimes when we can't get complete agreement, and sometimes we have to put that hat back on. But it really is refreshing to be able to take your hat off and come to the table and cooperate and collaborate together to get to that final decision. And then expanding resources. This one's interesting. So we have, and it happened more before our agency split, but we have resources at the state that we can help DoD with. We have access to community outreach. We have access to, we used to have better access to, but we have access to epidemiologists and things like that from our health side that we can, within that team, pull in those different resources as necessary. They're not in my program, they're not in RCRA, but we do have access to them. So we also have resources within our programs. We collaborate in our RCRA program with our circular program to make sure that we're doing things consistently. We've shared risk assessors when needed to make sure that we're making consistent decisions. So having this process set up so we can reach to all of those needed resources is very refreshing and didn't used to exist in the olden days. Mark, I think you're up next.
Thanks. To continue with what Stacy just said, the bubble I'd like to talk about is access to expertise. Stacy mentioned toxicologists who can work with risk assessment, but there's also expertise such as community involvement coordinators. I know with South Dakota, we've relied on the Corps of Engineers with their expertise in community relations and public affairs to set up meetings and disseminate information. We've also used munitions specialists to identify, remove, and dispose of unexploded ordinances. So that expertise can be internal to your agency or even external to your organization. So that's where that cooperative agreement comes into play, where you get a group of people working on the project who can provide their, people who have, expertise in certain areas. So that's very helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Very good. So you can all see the value of using cooperative agreements to further advance the expediting of environmental reviews and ultimately leading to project success, which is what I think we all have that common goal. We really want these projects to succeed and get completed. Next slide, please. So our CA, because there are many agencies that do use cooperative agreements, and EPA for sure, and others, but the DoD CA is a 2-year agreement. And I'll just let you know that, I mean, Stacy probably remembers, but that was not always the case. It was actually started out as a 1-year agreement. but because of the magnitude of the program and the number of installations that were involved, then funds came in later. So at the time, I mean, currently we have like, I don't know, about 1,500 joint execution plans. And remember, each joint execution plan represents either a FUD's property or an installation. So that's a lot of work to put on there. So they changed that so that we could spend a year developing the cooperative agreements, and then we'd have a second year to actually get that work done. And that seems to work pretty well. There are 3 sections to each cooperative agreement. Of course, the agreement, the main part of the document. And then number 2 is attachment A. And it's really, really important. And I'm going to, well, talk to the states here for sure. You really, if you need reimbursement under DSMOA, it must be listed on the attachment A prior to performing work on it. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but it's really important to it's got to be eligible for DSMOA, and it has to be on that attachment A. So if you do see work come across your desk, states, and it is not part of your current attachment A, you need to coordinate with your step 2 or step 4 or contact the component and let them know that you would like to have that site added if they want to. So that's really, really important. Then they have the attachment B. That is our funding portion of it. So that is broken out by program type. So we have the IR, MMRP, and for FUDs, IR, MMRP, and MAP. And we also have BRAC installations on there as well, IR, MMRP. And that's how the funding is transmitted. Those funding levels are set on the attachment B. And then just keep in mind, though, throughout the current cycle, these can be modified at any time and frequently are. So we do add installations during an active cycle. We're giving money throughout the process as well. Next slide, please. So this is DoD policy only applies to those, just what I was kind of a reiteration of attachment A, and we'll go ahead, and I think this has animations on it that meet the following requirements, and those requirements are everything you see listed here. Essentially, it is your technical review of documents, identifying your ARARs. If you're going to perform site visits, of course, those are all eligible. Participation in technical review committees, of course, preparation, administration of cooperative agreements. And we're going to talk a little bit more about where those fit into the actual joint execution plan when we come to talking about those and the 2 different types of joint execution plans we have. And then, of course, QA, QC, a state can be reimbursed to perform QA/QC on, DoD sampling and stuff. We do not reimburse for outside actions, outside sampling on a state's own accord. That is something completely different. Let's see. Next slide, please. State services eligible for DSMOA reimbursement, of course, they have to be incorporated into the CA. So when we talk eligibility, there's kind of 2 different things in a sense. There's the things that are the services, and then there are like site eligibility. When we talk to, like, for a long time, we had issues like with the National Guard, what was eligible and what was not. Thankfully, we seem to be moving forward, and we have been able to incorporate the Guard, Air Guard, and Army Guard back into DSMOA after a very long and sort of confusing process for over the last few years. So, but it has to be on, incorporated into current CA. It has to be funded by DERP or BRAC primarily. And of course, it's identified in the state's DSMOA services, and then agreed to and recorded in the joint execution plan itself. So, for example, if a state receives a document and that is not listed, a feasibility study or a work plan or a PA, whatever it is, if it's not there, all a state really needs to do is contact their counterpart at DoD and request that that task be added into the JEP and updated. JEPs are frequently updated throughout the process. Next slide, please. Now, eligibility determinations as to what services are eligible. This comes up occasionally. So I can head off a few of those things right here, but we have an established process. So it's not an arbitrary yes or no. Can we, charge DSMOA for this or that, the other thing? And the answer is back no. We have a very established process that involves our grants officers, our Office of Counsel. We do research on any of the questions that are proposed. It all starts with whether or not a state or DoD component asks if a particular service is eligible. We do have things like equipment, which we could talk a little more about, but it's a great example here. I will get questions about whether or not you can buy a drone using DSMOA funds. And it's a little convoluted because ultimately it is up to the component to determine whether or not they want to provide funding for that type of thing. Now, when it comes to equipment, it's a little dicey. So if you were to, for example, buy a drone and you asked FUDs to pay for it, that drone can only be used for FUDs work. And when that project or that JEP is done, then that drone would have to be returned to the federal government because it's technically federal government property. And we don't want to be, DoD, do not want to be involved in managing a lot of inventory. So that is why we'll always recommend rent and do those kind of things so we don't run into those kind of things where we have to work hard to figure it out later. So that's an example of that. But we do, the question comes in, it'll be myself, Cheryl Churchman, Ed Southwick. We're all state managers who receive these kind of questions, and we submit it up to the grants officer and include the National Program Manager, Office of Counsel, and then they review it. And then the grants officer will make a formal determination and then respond directly back to the person who asked the question. So feel free to always ask questions. It's always better to ask whether or not something is eligible than to go ahead and do it and then find out later it's not, because that becomes very difficult to manage as well. Next slide, please. Oh, yay, it's break time. Everybody need a
Before
break?
we jump to break, you have one in the chat as far as fixed budgets. I think you can answer that pretty quickly before our break.
Oh, are there fixed budgets for each 2-year agreement with states? Yes. Yes, each installation has its own budget, and that is developed during the 6-step process. Now, budgets can be adjusted, and we do adjust funding levels because, let's face it, it's a 2-year agreement. Budgets are formulated almost a year in advance, and things change. Contracts are delayed, or whatever happens. There's a hurricane, so things happen. Budgets can be adjusted as needed, and then we do our annual funding review. So yes.
Hopefully you all had a nice break and you're ready to get back engaged looking at a monitor for an extended a period of time. But I will apologize again for this being a 4-hour ordeal, but we needed, if you sat on the DERP 101, we said it would only take 2.5 and we ended up taking 3.5. So we wanted to make sure that if we were going to put in a time slot for you, that we have the appropriate time to cover the material. And hopefully you can stick it out with us and make it through the full presentation. It's also part of the reason why we are recording, so that we can offer this up. If you are unable to attend the full thing, you can come back in and drop back in at some point when you had to leave. So I will hand it back over to Katie, and Katie can get started on 6-step processing.
All right, thanks, Brian. Let's go to the next slide then. Or we can stay. And here we are. We're going to talk the pre-6-step process and the 6-step process. Before I get started, I do want to give a quick shout out to some of the other DSMOA team members who are sitting in and listening on this call. Cheryl Churchman is a state manager also. She is like my coworker, as is Ed Southwick. Cheryl was the Army component for quite a long time, and Ed Southwick was a state regulator for Nebraska also. So we support each other, we back each other up all the time. So just a quick note, if you ever run into trouble and you can't get a hold of me as I'm your assigned state manager or anything like that, feel free to go ahead and contact them as well, because we we support each other, back each other up all the time. So let's get right into it with the pre-6-step process. Next slide. So I get a lot of questions about how do installations or FUD's properties end up on an attachment A? You know, who makes those decisions? And it's important to understand that the joint execution plan is the DoD document. The DoD owns it, and they're the ones who decide what gets placed on an attachment A during for a CA cycle. And typically, though, when we do our pre-6-step process, what we're doing is we are taking a snapshot of the current CA cycle and all the JEPs contained within it, and we are rolling them forward into the next CA cycle. In that way, people don't have to start from scratch when they're building JEPs for the next CA cycle. It's essentially a copy-paste. Be mindful, though, if there is a new installation proposed to be added, and it comes after that, it hasn't been approved until after that snapshot is taken. And I'm going to say that to anyone who's working that process forward, to try and keep tabs on that and let us know, because we will add it. We'll have to add it manually into the cycle after that snapshot is originally taken. So they're taking everything that is current, moving it forward to the next cycle, and then it is on the DoD step 2s primarily to go through each of those and make sure that they will update those JEPs accordingly. So they're going to edit them out. The pre-6 step is coming, and it's kind of hard to even say because we just completed our 6-step process for 24 in July, but we're going to kick off the pre-6 for 26, 28 in May. So if there are installations that need to be added, I highly recommend getting those proposed for even this CA cycle so that they roll forward into it. So let's see. CA cycle. What is a CA? CA, oh, I'm so sorry. CA is a cooperative agreement. So sorry about that. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. So during the pre-6, the component reviews what has rolled forward, and they will either delete or add installations or keep the ones as they are. They are also tasked with assigning and making sure the assignments to each of those JEPs are current, because let's face it, people are coming and going all the time. People retire, they move on to different positions. Those need to be updated, and that is same for state POCs. During this pre-6-step process, the state POC really needs to review who is assigned to the current JEPs and make sure those are updated and current. And the reason is, when we roll into step 2, the JEP building phase, which is a really heavy lift for everybody involved, we're not jacking around with, oh, there's an installation missing. Oh, this person retired. Because if somebody is retired and assigned to a JEP, there's a good chance that JEP won't move forward to the next step, and it'll drop off the list, because with each step we take, anything that's completed moves forward, anything not completed is deleted. So that's why it's so important to make sure that the pre-6 step is achieved, and so things can move forward. Let's go to the next slide. And I do see a question. How do you request an installation be added to attachment A? And that is from council. That's from the state. So what you would do if you need to add an installation is first contact your primary state POC, for Jennifer Simpson for California, and let her know. And then Jennifer Simpson would contact the component, whether it be Army, Navy, Air Force, whoever it is. She could reach out and say, we'd like to request to have that installation added. So that's the process on there. Key roles for the cooperative agreement. Let's start with the state, and with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy, and she can talk about the state POCs and their roles.
So as you can see here, there's 2 main roles. There's the state point of contact, which in South Carolina is myself, and I kind of am that role is for making sure you kind of heard all of the JEPs and make sure all of those responsibilities are met, and actually finalizing the activities, hitting the opt-in button. There's a lot of roles that we have. One of the great things that you can do if you're new to this process as a state POC you can assign alternates. And those alternates can be people who can complete portions of those responsibilities for you. So for instance, in South Carolina, we have a pretty big DSMOA program, and we have 4 project teams, 4 project managers assigned to all of the various installations, and each project manager is assigned as a step 2 alternate state POC. So when it comes to going through all of the tasks and subtasks and making sure the appropriate state activities are there, my alternates do that. And then once they're done with them, they let me know, and then I go through and make sure everything's completed, and then I hit the accept button. We have 1 state financial POC, and in our situation, it's definitely important during the pre-6 step to make sure that those are correct. Our agency, for instance, just went through a transition, and we have a completely new financial system. So we have to make sure that all of our financial POCs are updated so that people can help me with the budgeting, and the billing is probably the biggest thing that they're the most integral to for our state, and I would assume it's the same for other states. They're actually the ones that are going to be submitting the bills for the work that we do. The financial POCs are not involved in the day-to-day programmatic portions of our DSMOA cooperative agreement program. For us, we have partnering teams, and as I mentioned, our state alternates work through and work with their project teams. So with the installation, the DoD project managers, the contractors, and this will kind of flow well into the next type of POCs. But it's really important for everybody on those teams that it's involved with this CA process to understand and remember what their role is. There are a lot of times are contractors on teams, but I know there have been times, again, as Justin had mentioned, we don't always reach complete consensus on the first try, but there have been times when I'll call out one of my favorite DoD components. Are all my favorites, but with the Air Force, sometimes where we've not reached agreement, we have to say, okay, we're going to turn to the person that's listed as our step 2 POC, or the person that's listed on our permit, and say, okay, Air Force, we need you to make sure you step into that role and help with answering these questions in case we're getting different answers from different people within the team. So again, when you have that pre-6 step process, it's very important for all agencies to make sure that they're scrubbing through their POCs so that everybody can be ready to hit the ground running when we start developing the new cycle. And as Katie mentioned, it's a never-ending cycle. It's a 2-year cycle, but there's always a step in progress. So, Justin, I think you're next.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm just going to go through the DoD roles quickly. Yeah. So for you, for many of the components, kind of use and assign these roles a little different. I'll try to hit on some of that as I go through these, but in general, for the DoD roles, the names. I just lost my screen. Okay. The names are kind of mostly aligned with the phase in which they are the key POC within the DSMOA process. So, the step 2 is the phase in which the JEPs are built, and the step 2 POC is the person who builds the JEP and locks the JEP at the end of the step 2 phase. As Stacy mentioned, we also like to assign step 2 alternates to make sure that there is a team to tackle the development of the JEPs. For the step 4 POC, that's a role that kind of helps the component POC manage the step 4 process. This is a role that every component might use a little different. Some agencies use the role as it was intended. Others don't necessarily. For example, at AEC, we don't really assign step 4s except for National Guard sites. We do have a single step 4 POC who's sort of the DSMOA manager for all of the National Guard sites. But for the rest of the installations, we have like an internal role, which we call the DSMOA program manager, who kind of acts as the step 4 POC for all of the installations. I know that The FUDS program makes heavy use of the Step 4 POC role, so it really is different across all the components. For the component POC, this is the person who is the final approver at each DoD agency. So the component POC is the only person who can finalize a component approved amount, which is what ends the Step 4 phase of the 6-step process. Katie?
Thanks, Justin. And I think, Mark, did you have something you'd like to add to that? We have two different states. We have South Carolina because they have a large program. We have Mark Lawrence, who is a one-man force to be reckoned with for South Dakota. So go ahead, Mark.
Right. Speaking for small state or territory programs, you probably are working with fewer people in your state or territory, and you're probably working with fewer installations. But the information that you're going to gather and prepare for that cooperative agreement is still the same as what everybody else is preparing too. So you might be one of those people who wears many hats in your state or territory, and you might be the one preparing all of that cooperative agreement all by yourself. So maybe if there's a little bright spot in this, it's less preparation if you have less sites, but it's, again, the same as what every other state is preparing too. So.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. So, and then it comes to us. Oh, camera. Fine. So, the USA's DSMOA team. So, as you know, OSD. This is an OSD program, which is why Brian is here today. OSD delegated it down to Army, and then Army delegated it down to USA's, and that's why I'm really lucky to be working with all of you today. We have a grants officer, and the grants officer administers the program, and they deal with obligating funds. The grants officer signs each and every funding mod that comes through. I shouldn't even say funding mod, each and every modification to the cooperative agreement that comes through. The grants officer updates the cooperative agreement language. You probably all know, I have seen that the cooperative agreement changed significantly. The template itself changed over the last CA cycle, and that was due to new Dodger requirements. That is the responsibility of grants officer as well. They also make eligibility determinations, and they are the kind of gatekeeper for receiving the initiation to move into formal dispute. So we've had a few of those come through. We can talk a little bit more about the dispute process if you like. But it's really, once the grants officer receives that initiating kickoff of formal dispute resolution comes through the grants officer, then the process is that the components take over and they start working with the state directly to assign POCs for who's going to handle that dispute. What are the timeframes going to be? That's a little off the rails, but we can talk about that later. We have state managers. I already introduced ours. We deal with guidance and policy, working with the states to develop their cooperative agreements. And then we have a whole host of other people that deal with specifically financial management. Essentially, they're making sure states are getting their reimbursement requests paid. They're making sure all funding requests are taken care of. They manage the annual funding review during the CA cycle. We say out of cycles. When you say out of cycle, I always say current CA cycle. So hopefully we can keep that straight. So there's a whole lot of people involved in the DSMOA community. I think we have about 1,500 that participate. I think that's it though. We can go to the next slide, please. So here it is. Here's our official 26-28 schedule that we'll be posting on the portal. And as you can see, that's where May 5th is when we start our pre-6. We talked about that already. The first step, of course, is state election. And in order to participate in the program and participate in the next CA cycle, a state must say they want to. And so this is their way of doing it. Essentially, it's a quick step. They open up the portal and there's a button the state pushes. And they say, yes, I volunteer to participate in this program, because this program is completely voluntary. You don't have to participate if you don't want to. If you decide not to participate in this current CA cycle, that does not mean you need to terminate your entire DSMOA. DSMOA can always remain in place. It's a static document, but you don't have to, you can choose to opt into CA cycles as needed. I've never actually seen anybody not choose to participate, so that would be something. But you can if you don't want to. So then the next, you'll see that we're going to kick off the step 2 process in that beautiful pink color. The yellow highlights just indicate a potential for bringing down the portal for a couple of hours because of updates. You know, we're always trying. The portal is a wonderful tool. It's very robust. It's been tested over the last, 20 years. And it seems to work well, but there are always issues. You know, we always have to update things with DoD security and things like that. So that's what those yellow highlights mean. And then we move on through the schedule. Each and every one of these steps, we will be talking about a little bit more in depth as we move through. I just wanted to let you know the schedule is up there. I have to actually print it out and post it next to me. So I glance over and go, oh my God, we're going to start that step really soon. I better do something. So anyway, that is, and I want to make sure on the CA cycle that Stacy, I believe you're up, as you had some things to input this slide.
And this kind of goes back to the discussion of, as states, it's important for us to remember, as I mentioned on the last slide, this is a continuous process. If you're electing to participate, it's really important to look at, you know, CA 24, 26 is going to roll right into 26, 28, you know, and et cetera, et cetera. There's always something you should be doing to maintain this schedule. But again, I've done other similar cooperative agreements with other federal agencies, and it's not this clearly outlined. So you're left with trying to figure out, okay, where are we in this step? So while it may seem very cumbersome and regimented with this specific schedule, it's actually a good thing, because I think a lot of us would agree that when you have a schedule or a goal to work towards, you're more likely to meet those goals. But again, it makes it easier for yourself if you're continually working on it and knowing that it's going to just roll right into the next year's cycle.
Thanks, Stacy. And Mark, I have a note for you.
Yes, this is a very good schedule outline that I use to, you know, I print it out and stick it on my desk. That way, you know, it's like Stacey says, it's a consistent program and it's easy to follow, and I print it out so that way I know where the CA is at in the process. I can see I'm doing this. Now I need to wait for DoD to do another component portion. So I just find this very, very useful, this schedule, and you know, and I even take the time to print it out, like I said. So this is a good schedule.
All right, thanks, Mark. And I guess we have a little engagement exercise here. If you chat out, if you see fit, those of you who have participated in this process, what would be your favorite step? Looking at the schedule, just you've got 30 seconds, maybe 15. I don't know. And while you are chatting out your favorite step, I will also just make sure you understand that these deadlines are hardwired into the portal. They cannot be adjusted, and they cannot be extended except in really rare circumstances like COVID, or we did have some natural disasters. I think Hurricane Maria impacted stuff, but for the most part, oh, Jeff Locke, right? Oh, you really like step 2? That's funny stuff. Step 6, that's right. Step 6, y'all, well, at least on the DoD side, don't have to really do anything. I thought for sure it'd be all step 1. That's my favorite personally. Oh, thank you. Yes, very good. So here's the schedule. And like I was saying before, these deadlines are hard baked into the portal. So essentially what happens if you don't hit that deadline, the page literally disappears and is no longer available. So I would submit that try to use the block of time you are given wisely and get in there early and get things done. We certainly do have an open season in step 2. That is just to button up little outliers. Things happen. And it's true, people go on vacation, things drop off. That's just to take care of the onesie twosies. It's not intended to be used to actually do the whole step through process. You'll notice that open season is very, very short. And the other thing is when open season occurs, it is not just, it's open season for everybody. So we don't have all the states just working in there. We're going to have all the states, all the alternates on the state side. In addition, all the DoD components, all the alternates on that side, all in the portal at the same time. And it can, bog down the system. So unless you really enjoy watching the circle spin a lot, I would submit that you try to get it done within the designated time frame if possible. And if you run into trouble, just let us know as state managers. Let's go to the next slide. I digress. So this is just one of my favorite illustrations so that people keep in mind that, like Stacy said, it is a rolling process. At any one given time, we're working within 3 CA cycles. We're closing out one, we're active or out of cycle in another, and then we are kicking off a new CA cycle. So it's really easy to kind of forget where we're at. So when you're in the portal, especially, if you go to the portal to do an action and suddenly you are not seeing what you think you should be seeing, check the CA cycle you're in, because you have the option to select multiple CA cycles. So that's what happens to me sometimes. I'll be like, oh my God, I'm not seeing that jet. Well, I'm in the wrong cycle. So that's the very first thing to check out. At the very bottom, you see that during the process, there is our scheduled annual funding reviews for year 1 and year 2, and those are a requirement. And that is just a place where we kind of revisit the budgets that were originally submitted. It's an opportunity to tweak the budgets based on burn rate, current workload, invoices that are not yet been submitted to be paid, so that we can adjust the budget moving towards closeout, because the last thing we really want to do is have a big flood of funding come back at the end of the cycle. We're trying to use the funding that was, DoD works very hard to secure those funds, so we want to see them used. So next cycle, please. Next slide, please. So yeah, another illustration, because we are moving into step 2, and that just shows it's just going round and round, 6-step process, and we are going to talk now about step 2. And we had a question, my phone went to sleep, about the typical time frame to get a new task added. I'm going to be addressing that in this talk, and then I have another question that I wanted to address too about states' potential audits for the use of state's funding. If you can hold tight, I'm going to talk about the budget development process and annual funding review, and I'll address that question then. Any questions yet before we go on, before I keep the train going? All right then, next slide, and this slide is going to be special for Mark.
Yeah, this is, as Katie said, this is step 1. This is her favorite and my favorite step, since it's one click and the cooperative agreement journey begins. It's a voluntary program, so I guess you talk internally with your state or territory, and once you've decided that, that's all it takes is one click and you're off and running.
Isn't that nice and simple? We'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Mark. Step 2, on the other hand, is the opposite of step 1. It contains multiple sub-steps within it, and it's important to first understand, the objective is to establish that scope of work. You have to have the scope of work so states can build their budget on it. So everything that goes into a JEP as a task and a subtask are going to require the state to provide the services or input the state services they want to provide. And the state will budget accordingly to those things. So I would submit to DoD step 2s to be very mindful when it comes to adding tasks and subtasks so that they relate to where you really, really need state support to achieve those goals. You can see the task at the top is, I think of the task as a goal. The subtask is the things you need to do to get to that goal. And then the activities are how that goal is supported by the state. Let's see. I am Justin. I have a note here that you have additional information you'd like to add.
Sure. I'll just add, as you mentioned, Katie, the step 2 phase, that's sort of our JEP development phase. And this is where we build the JEPs. And, some of these can be, pretty large and might seem, daunting to look at some of these larger ones. But an important point to really keep in mind here for the step 2s and, for anyone who builds JEPs is to understand that we're not, really creating something new here. Like, this is not something we're building from scratch, because all of this information should be available to you, whether you're pulling it from your database of record or your installation action plan or whatever other planning documents. But every component has their own database of record that should contain all this information. So that's where you pull from these resources to build the JEP. One of the key points on this slide is under the responsibilities, where it states that this is a joint process. It's supposed to be a joint process, and just want to reiterate the importance of communication and collaboration through this process. I think a lot of times the step 2 POC will build the JEP without much input from the state, and then the state will add their tasks without communicating much with the step 2. And then sometimes disagreements occur and issues come up that could have been mitigated if this would have been communicated. So I just think it's very important that we be proactive in our approach to developing the JEPs, so that issues and disagreements don't turn up down the road.
Well, thanks, Justin. Any questions so far on that? Oh, thank you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide. And I think it's really important for states, and I think historically there has been a lot of confusion on direct program support JEPs, or your DPS JEPs, versus installation specific JEPs. And so we're gonna untangle that right now and say that the direct program support JEPs are your program-wide joint execution plans for that state. It is the bucket that will put in tasks and activities and subtasks that will support the entire program. Examples. Oh, I have an engagement activity. Before I tell you, I will ask you, go ahead and chat out what you think belongs in the direct program support JEP versus installation specific JEPs. And you have 15 seconds. And I can try and keep talking during it, but oh, thanks, Dustin. Dustin knows. This is very good. So we've got partnering sessions. Oh, Melinda. Okay. CA development and administration webinars, just like this one. And meetings. All that stuff. That is excellent. DERP forum. It's Brian, DERP forum attendance. That's going to be in your FUDS direct program support JEP. And if we talk about our DERP, as I said, FUDS forum attendance, DERP forum attendance typically goes to whoever has the largest program in your state is the program that you charge to their DPS JEP. That's kind of how it's gone so far. So RAVs, yeah. So the reason that we have these direct program support JEPs is to minimize redundancies within the installation specific JEPs. You don't want to have to put in CA preparation for each and every JEP. It blows the JEPs up, makes them inappropriately large, and it really kind of dilutes the whole JEP as a whole. So you're going to be putting those Air Force partnering meetings, for example, into the Air Force direct program support JEP, things like that. So they're really kind of these more nebulous kind of things, rather than we are going to do a feasibility study, required draft report, and we have multiple things like that. they're a little bit more softer. So let's see. And then we have our installation specifics, mutually agreed upon, just like Justin said. Okay, and we've covered all that. So let's go to the next slide because I don't want to get too crazy here. So eventually the next slide will come up, hopefully. Oh, sorry, and it did. So little quick thing about out years. So out years are really a requirement. I know that sometimes they have been omitted from it, but they're a super huge, important planning tool for looking at what's to come down 3 to 6 years down that road. It is a great planning tool. DoD uses it. And again, like Justin said, well, actually, I'm going to let Justin talk a little more about that. As far as planning, rolling those tasks forward as things are accomplished and editing the JEFs accordingly. And Justin, I don't know, did you want to say a little more on the out years?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just point out that, yeah, this is an optional planning feature. Obviously, the states don't need our out years activities in the JEP because they can't charge for those activities in the current JEP cycle. But having the out years task is really helpful because, anyone who looks at the JEP can get an overview of the planned activities, for the future and understand the direction of the entire program. So, as the slide states here at the bottom, it kind of makes things easier for the next JEP cycle, especially for the step 2 POC, because when they go to build the JEP for the next cycle, all they have to do is copy and paste the JEP and use the out years activities as the current activities and then update it as needed. So I think this is a really useful feature for everyone involved. And the last cycle, I noticed that the Army step 2 POCs did not always make the most use of this feature. So I think it's important and useful, and it's probably underutilized. And just wanted to communicate that in the hopes that the step 2 POCs will see the usefulness of the feature and kind of get the most out of it moving forward.
Great. Yes, and Stacy has a state perspective on this as well.
I do. So I know that, as Justin mentioned and Katie mentioned, this is optional. And while the states don't have to have this step in there and have to look at that out years work, I know I use it a lot because, as I mentioned, it's a continual planning process because you're going to roll right into the next 2-year cycle. So I know it takes us in South Carolina sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years to plan to add additional staff. Not hiring for staff because of attrition is a little different, but if there is an increase in workload, like many years ago, one of our Navy facilities started into one of the first performance-based or firm fixed price contracts, and it was, man, we hit the ground running with workload. Well, we didn't plan in that immediate JEP for that additional workload. So using the out years work to continually, moving on from that initial step helped us a lot in planning, okay, how do we need to staff up or increase our dedicated resources for that particular facility? The other thing it did was, once that particular program wound down and got through a lot of the cleanup and got the remedies selected, we were able to look at that out years workload coming in from the other facilities and figure out, okay, where can we, because our resources are people, where can we move those staff to have a plan in place a year and a half from now, a year from now. So I know I use it a lot, and I appreciate the effort that our DoD counterparts put into making that the best projection possible.
Very good. Thanks, Stacy. So anyway, well, we have an engagement. So the next question is, what do you find useful, or what would you think is most useful from the out years? And go ahead and chat that out. 15 seconds. I'll turn on my camera. Okay, there we go. Or maybe I just do the yes or no question. Do you use out years? That's a great comment. Placeholders. It serves as a good placeholders because in the actual current CA cycle, you don't want placeholders. You want to make sure that the work that is put into the JEP is work that is anticipated and expected to be accomplished. Where you put your placeholders is going to be your out years. So thank you so much. And I really do recommend people use that function as often as they can. It just makes things easier going forward, like Justin and Stacey said. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is just a smattering of installation tasks that can be inputted into a joint execution plan. There are many others. You'll notice I have some asterisks on here where training that's addressing the direct program support JEPs. So unless that training is supporting a specific installation on a specific task, you don't have to worry about it. It's most likely going to be covered in the direct program support JEP. Let's see. And right. And these have all been vetted through the steering committee. So when the portal was stood up, and that was like in 2006, 2008, and Stacey, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was that time frame. Originally, everybody could just put in their customized tasks. And you can imagine that got very difficult over time because people have their own interpretations of what things are and how they say them. And I think we ended up with like 30,000 different tasks, and the steering committee kind of shut that down right away because it just became unmanageable, unable to really create reports that told us anything. So these are everything, well, not an example of all the things that are eligible for the JEP Joint Execution Plan. Let's go to the next slide. I did get a question about elaborating on training, and it's a great question because I have that with asterisks on this too, also indicating that it is a direct program support appropriate activity. When we say training, we are mostly referring to those kind of large scale on-site requiring travel type of training. I mean, typically, I can't speak for components per se, but from what I've seen, that webinars like this, you don't have to ask permission. Even if you have training in a direct program support JEP, you still have to, states, ask for pre-approval to attend. And that has a lot to do with the optics of, states using federal dollars to travel and get hotels and do all that stuff. It's not that we're pushing back. It's just we want to be able to address anything that might look a little off as far as attending conferences, forums, and all that stuff, So it's always important that if you are expecting or you want to participate in a particular training or a conference or those types, unless you've already been advised and invited, like, for example, the DERP Forum or FUDS Forum, those are DOD inviting. Air Force sends invites out to states as well. If you want to attend anything outside of that, what you would typically do is submit an email to the component. Be sure and copy your state managers on it just so we can track it, because the components are really busy and they're managing not just DSMOA, but many other programs as well. Go ahead and copy us in an email, and the information you will want to include is the title of the training or the conference or workshop, the number of people you propose to send, a general travel cost. It doesn't, not necessarily labor, but it's how long is it, a 32-hour conference or whatever. You want to put some cost associated to airfare, hotel, per diem, those kind of things. And then a couple of sentences on the justification. So if you wanted to go to an MMRP classification class, then you could say this will support the FUDS training or the FUDS environmental program, because it will allow states to gain the expertise to more accurately review documents and understand what they are. Just a couple of sentences showing how that attending that training will benefit that component program. So those are the kind of things. If you need examples of that, just reach out to me afterwards. I have plenty of examples of those kind of things. So that is a great question. Where should you charge the CA prep and admin for component fund group? So anybody who's a step 2 POC out there, you do not need to include CA prep or administration or anything that has to do with creating that. That is the component JEP. That is the direct program support JEP. The component will incorporate those kind of activities into that joint execution plan. So let's see, I think we have highlights on some other specific things. We were going to talk about partnering. That's kind of the same thing as training. You're going to go ahead and send an email to the component requesting to attend partnering meetings unless you've already been invited. And let's see, next highlight. I can't remember what I was doing. Is that the only highlight? We already talked about equipment. Oh, annual funding review. It's at the top left, my left. That's something that will also go into direct program support JEP, because the annual funding review is revising the state budget for the entire program, not just an installation. Is that so far? Any questions on this so far? So the DoD side has a ton of activities. They have a ton of subtasks, but the states, you just have about 14 different activities to tie to each of those subtasks. So you defining those tasks, it's kind of up to you how you want to define those. And when we get into the portal navigation, I will show you how to use notes to kind of further add some clarifying details to some of these, whether it be meetings. You can add a note to say we are basing our budget anticipating 2 to 4 meetings quarterly. That's great clarifying details. So we're trying to understand what the level of effort actually is. Next slide, please. So here is a direct program support JEP. And as you can see, they're very small, typically small. And this is what I'm talking about here. This direct program support JEP is going to, it's a little wonky because there is no site, no geographical location. And that's why some of those tasks are in there. Like you will notice step 2 is I'm going to talk to you. You'll notice that you can select meeting as a task. That's because that's typically going to be put into a direct program support JEP because there isn't a PA or a feasibility study or anything like that. These are the program level ones. You shouldn't have to really specify meetings at the task level for installation specific requirements. So unless there's maybe a base-wide kind of activity going on. Otherwise, you'll see that you have also your public meetings are contained in there. The agreement application development, because states do have to apply, and that's during step 5 where they submit a big package, and any training. So again, the components typically own the direct program support JEP. If for step 2s, if you get a request from the states and they want to participate in training, go ahead and reach out to your component and ask them about it. Let's see, I think there is a note for Justin to add more information if you can't get enough.
Yeah, so as the slide states here, the purpose of the DPS JEP is to cover state support that is attributable to most or all of the installations in a state. And so that eliminates, having to distribute costs across multiple installations or projects. Building the DPS JEPs is kind of one of those tasks that each component might handle a little different. I think it's common for the components to build the DPS JEPs. At AEC, I build all of the DPS JEPs, and I am the component alternate. So each state that participates in DSMOA will typically have 2 DPS JEPs, one for MMRP and one for IRP sites. Now, obviously, if they only have one or the other, for example, they only have MMRP sites, they're only going to have an MMRP DPS JEP. And most of the tasks, like Katie mentioned here, on this example, they're typical of of most of the Army DPS JEPs. Earlier, we talked about the partnering and training tasks, and those are new tasks that weren't previously on Army DPS JEPs that we just added. So partnering tasks will cover, statewide partnering, non-installation specific partnering, as well as the DERP conference, as we talked about earlier. So, those tasks are now available to the states for reimbursement from now moving forward on all Army DPS JEPs. One thing we do recommend is that the component and state, get together and kind of scope these efforts as best they can. JEPs can be updated throughout the cycle, but tasks that include travel, like in-person training, conferences, workshops, it's best to really reasonably anticipate these activities to make it easier for the component and also to make it easier to get these approved in an efficient manner.
Great, thank you, Justin. So we had a couple questions, and I was just trying to type in, but now I'll just say it. First off, let's see, how are these DPS JEPs developed for a state like California with several Air Force installations? And so they will have, just like Justin was saying, you would have one Air Force DPS JEP for IR. You're going to have another one for MMRP. And contained within each of these will be those program-wide activities that the state can then charge to. So regardless of the state, if it's, if you have a program, that's the other question that I saw in the chat, is if you only have one installation and it's only one component for the single program type, do you need a DPS JEP? And the answer to that is, technically no, because there's really no point to it. However, what we've seen over time is it might be a good idea to get one in place because it keeps it a little bit cleaner. You have the administrative burden contained within the direct program support JEP identified, and then you have the installation specific activities identified in that JEP. So if you don't really need a direct program support JEP, if you only have the one installation, but it might be a good idea to get one in place because there's also the potential of getting a new installation added too. So it's up to you. It's up to the component to decide which is the best. But what I've seen is it seems to be nicer if you have one installation to also have a direct program support JEP, just because it keeps those things separate. And you can see the cost of, building a CA much more clearer in the state budget on a direct program support JEP versus having it kind of intermingled with installation specific activities. So I hope that answers your question. On the DoD side, who is responsible for creating and programming the DPS? That's all your components. So that's going to be Navy, and as a Preston Postal, that's going to be Justin and Candace with Army, Alicia George, Michael Book with Air Force, Carol, DLA, and yes, Henny Davies, I think. Sorry, Carol, I know you're online. I probably got your name wrong. All those people are on. And when we get to the portal, I'm going to show you how to find their contact information so you can, contact them if you have questions regarding a direct program support and what should be in there. Okay. All right. Let's see how. Sorry, we got a lot of questions. And other co-presenters, feel free to, chime in if you want. How do we know who is working this? Vanderbilt, Edwards, Travis, Beal. Okay, I will show you those things. Now I'm going to make a note with my dry erase marker saying POC management, and we will look at that when we get to portal navigation. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Keep it going. So here is your installation specific JEP, and you can see contained within it is right over to, you have your project site. So typically you want your geographical location. This is the place where these things are occurring. That's really good. And I think the more specific, the better. You have, this one's not that specific. but we'll go with it because that's the example. So you have your location, you have the task. So you've got your circular rod and the DD. That's your goal. You want this to be accomplished. And then you move over to the subtask. These are the things that we are going to need help with from the state to accomplish this goal. It's kind of a hierarchy going on here. And you can also see the subtask contains your cycles. So year 1 and year 2, this 722 is the older one. We're closing out 22. So, and you can see the state put up or entered all the activities that they are going to provide to this subtask to achieve that goal. It's really important here to make sure that they are appropriate and marry up. What we do see throughout the program over time is we've got a lot of new people out there, and things roll into the next cycle without really getting edited. Sometimes people are just setting installation tasks complete without really looking at, was it completed or not? Do we need to update and edit this, add more tasks, less tasks, whatever it is, more sub-activities, less. And then when it comes back to the JEP lock phase, the step 2 POC, the burden is on you to review what states put in as activities and make sure that they are marrying up with what was entered as a task and subtask. Not to question whether or not the state, should put it in. We're not going to pick on anyone, but to make sure that it makes sense. And if it doesn't, the portal does a lot of things, but sometimes it doesn't replace a good email or phone call saying, you know what, I see you put in ARARs on a long-term monitoring. Could you explain to me why that was entered so I understand it? And, just kind of, this is all about talking to one another and being that springboard to open a conversation. So those are the things, and you can, that need to be entered. And so they're very specific. So installation specific JEPs have very specific activities, sub-activities, or subtasks that need to be accomplished. The out years were entered in here, and that's what we were seeing with the beauty of the out years is, as we move forward, you can actually go into the portal and change the project year to the active cycle. So you're constantly just marching things up the chain and deleting out things that have been accomplished. The other thing to keep in mind is, if everything's a priority, then nothing is. We have some very enormous JEPs in there because they're putting everything in that may or may not involve the state, that may or may not actually serve to expedite that process. It's important to put the most important things in the JEP. If things come up, and we'll talk about this when we were doing portal navigation, certainly update the JEP, but you don't really need to put everything in the kitchen sink if there is very little or no state involvement. Next slide, please.
Katie, can we stay on that previous one for just a minute and let me give a little bit of input?
Did I overtalk? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. We're all friends here. So one of the, again, as a large state program, one of the things that we found is it's really important for our step 2 alternates at the state as well as the DoD step 2s to make sure they're having those conversations about their project's plan, so their cost to complete, their funding planning, because that's what really should serve, kind of the foundation of what tasks and subtasks are going into the JEPs. It's very important for us to know as a state, not just what's in the out years, but where are things going to fall? Are they going to fall in the first year of the 2-year JEP cycle? Are they going to fall in the second year of the 2-year JEP cycle? There's, one of the things that we've also found is, as you're talking in your tier 1 teams, it's good to think of things like, summer field work in the coastal area of South Carolina is not really fun. So it's good to kind of plan that out and plan out your site visits and things like that. And one of the things I did also want to add in, I know there's been a lot of discussion about putting the partnering component in our indirect program JEPs. But in South Carolina and Region 4, we have a lot of very formalized partnering, and we have either BRAC closure teams or partnering teams for each of our most of our installations, not all of them. So we actually have those planned partnering team meetings, like say there's going to be 3 partnering team meetings in a year or 4 in a year in our installation specific JEP. So there is that ability to put that level of detail in your installation specific JEPs if it's applicable. Now we have a tier 2 in South Carolina or a tier 3 in region 4. Those aren't linked to any one individual installation. So those are more covered by our direct program JEPs. But I did want to make sure to mention that, especially for people who are new, that you can put those very specific tasks and meetings associated with an installation in the installation specific JEP.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Katie, I'll jump in here too, because this speaks to some of the questions I've been seeing in the Q&A and I've tried to answer concerning what's the primary goal of DSMOA. So remember back to that first circle that we talked about with collaboration, we get a better response time. So we are really, and the question was related to, aren't we really looking for expedited review? So expedited reviews, yes, of course, we are looking for those 30 and 45-day reviews. But I really want to point out, it's really about an expedited process, right? So even though we're going to spend 4 hours talking about just how to set up these JEPs, but we're really setting the standards for how do you get to a 30-day review. It's because you've done all the footwork and the front end work of the process to understand what is coming to the state, that you've done that coordination and that collaboration with the state with meetings and other things, so that hopefully there are no giant showstoppers in the work plan, or that if there is, there's only one, and that's the comment you're getting back, not a full rewrite of a document. So we're really not, I don't think we want to be triggered. Yes, indeed, we are trying to get those 30 to 45-day review times when at all possible, if the state can accommodate us with that. But we are also looking for that expedited process, right? So we're really trying to move these cleanup projects through the process as quickly as we can with everybody on board, right? We're not trying to have anybody fall off of the train as we're trying to move it down the tracks.
And Brian, just to go along with that, when I was talking about kind of the history of the DSMOA corrective action program, a cooperative agreement program, excuse me, literally in the 90s, for us more mature, seasoned state employees, documents would be just flowing in at an endless flow, and they literally would just stack up on people's desks. And when they got time to review them, they would review them. So the intent of developing this cooperative agreement work relationship was to take the DoD documents out of the big giant stack on somebody's desk and put them on a dedicated desk where that dedicated person can work with our DoD counterparts and our partners to figure out the best way to expedite that process. So some of the things that I found through the years is you may have 5 steps in your JEP, but if you're really a high performing partnering team, you may be able to reduce that down to 2 steps with 1 review each for the documents. It's all, you know, you're going to get out of this process, this collaborative process, what you put into it. So again, kind of going back to that original discussion of expedited reviews and things, it's really was the intent of pulling those DoD documents, all that giant pile that's piled on somebody's desk, and have a dedicated time period for that somebody to look at it.
Beautifully said, Stacy. That is just wonderful. And Justin, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
I think everything was covered. I don't have much to add, but I'll piggyback on what Stacy kind of spoke on. As she mentioned, it is important to understand that this is a good, great planning tool, because this essentially serves as an agreement between the component and the state on how these projects will be executed, and provides an agreed upon path forward for the project. So, the JEP's not just about listing tasks. It's also, like Brian talked about, it's, setting the stage for collaboration, and helps for planning and tracking progress throughout the project lifecycle. So the JEP helps align our objectives with the state, which, as we talked about earlier, helps to build trust and enhances cooperation and helps to ensure compliance. So it's a very important and useful process for everyone involved.
That was also beautifully said, Justin. Thank you so much. And that's the thing is, it doesn't have to be this perfunctory thing that we just kind of sleepwalk through. This could be a very powerful communication tool to kind of initiate some difficult conversations, or at least get on the same page with each other. We had a question about prioritizing tasks in here, and that can be accomplished in a number of ways. You really will want to be talking with the state as well. You can reorder, and I'll show you how to do this in the portal, by the way. You can reorder the tasks and subtasks to reflect priority that way. I mean, you can do it chronologically, you can do it as a priority, however you want to do it. You can also use the notes fields. And if you see in this example here in that first one, there's a superscript under the subtask. That indicates there is a note. And that note is reflected at the very end of the JEP. And it's a kind of an eye test. We can look at those later, but you'll see a whole page of notes that kind of clarify what is a priority. That gives more details to what the task actually means as far as level of effort. So that is where I would start, were I to start prioritizing tasks and subtasks within a JEP. So I hope that answers that question. We can move on to the next slide because Mark gets to talk on this one because we do have an example of smaller JEPs here. And Mark, you want to take it away?
Yes, on small JEPs, sometimes you have a small site. I know in South Dakota we have some flood sites that aren't very large geographically, and they might have small contamination, or it might even be a building demolition debris removal site. So sometimes you'll have a small site, and then therefore you'll have a small JEP. Even though you have a small JEP with fewer tasks, you still follow the CERCLA process. So some of these, again, if you have a small state or territory program, you might be intimately involved with these projects yourself as a point of contact and maybe as the project manager. So with these, hopefully you'll be able to take care of the JEP as a point of contact. And again, it should be fewer tasks, but follow the CERCLA process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the different situations, right? Because, if you get to California, they have an army of state alternates. I mean, they're just quite the crew. Larger programs have their own challenges trying to manage all those people. But on the other side, the flip side, when we do have states with a small program, that one person becomes the end-all be-all for everything, not just for DoD, but everything they're doing. So that they find ways to prioritize DoD work just, for themselves. So thanks, Mark. Let's go to the next slide. So finally, we get to the end of step 2, and that is JEP lock. JEP lock is where the step 2 reviews what the state entered, understands what the state entered and what it means, and then they click that big green button, which is essentially their signature. That is considered a digital signature. Every time you complete an action in the portal, there are those jolly green buttons that everybody likes to push. That is the equivalent of a signature. So you are making it official. So if you get to JEP lock and you're looking at what the state entered, kind of like what I said before, reviewing what the state entered, and it doesn't quite line up with what you were expecting, or maybe some additional details that will help the state, please feel free to just go ahead and call the state and ask them for some clarifying details so you better understand their perception as what you're asking them to do. We want to really clarify how this all works. The other thing that we see with the newer people coming in is they're so scared that they're going to miss something that they end up checking every single box for all 14 activities for every single sub, which not only blows up the JEP and makes it, much larger than it needs to be, but it's not actually reflecting the work that may be provided to that particular subtask leading to that task. So Step 2 is you may need to reach out to a state person who may be new to the program to have them understand and walk them through the process too. So that is very important. Then if you agree, you both agree, you lock the JEP and it moves on to step 3. So that will be our next slide. And step 3, so now DoD step 2, step 4, because we all breathe easy at this because it becomes very state heavy. The state is now going to take all the activities that they included in each JEP, and they are going to put a budget to it. They're going to get a price tag on that. And that occurs in step 3. When it comes to, well, no, I was thinking about the state auditing question, but now I'm still going to wait for that because I have a better place for it. We'll just keep talking about the state budget. And what I can show you when we get to the portal is what that looks like. Oh, but I'm not screen sharing either. Hang on for a sec. We're in step 3. So they will assign a budget for years 1 and years 2 for each of those items. And then that moves forward to a budget lock. Now, I know Stacy has stuff because she does this and it's like I fumble because I don't do budgets. I am not a state person, but Stacy is. So Stacy, take it away.
I can take it away. So this is where it's, really important to have the good basis, which is a really good planned out JEP. So that's why it's so important to have those discussions at our state alternate POC and our step 2 POCs and our teams when you're developing the JEPs, because what that does is that then allows the state POC or the financial manager, it depends on the state as to who actually comes up with the budget. In South Carolina, I, as the state POC, take the state tasks associated, state activities associated with each of the tasks and subtasks, and I convert that into an estimated number of FTEs that would be needed for each of the JEPs. So some of our project managers from our project teams have multiple bases or installations that are assigned to them. So what I do is I translate the workload into a percentage of an FTE. And then I use that percentage of an FTE coupled with various things like our salaries, our indirect rates, things like that, to come up with our estimated budget. It's very important for us, again, to understand what all of those tasks and subtasks are, because, again, one of the things that I have to do constantly as that POC is look at, again, this is for a larger program, is to I apologize. I looked at one of the questions as far as translating workload into an FTE, and this is not going to be a good answer, but it definitely is 27 years worth of experience. So what we did many years ago is we basically came up with a workload analysis for each of our project teams and how much work were they able to get done within a month, a year. Our time accounting is by each installation and each funding source. So we have multiple cost accounting codes that we use in South Carolina. So I was able to pull various reports on quarterly basis, on an annual basis, to come up with that idea of, or that concept of, how many widgets or activities can get completed as related to the number of tasks or subtasks on each JEP. So I don't think there's one right best fit for each state. I have heard of other states doing it a little differently, and they take the total number of hours that somebody works within a given year, and they divide it by the overall workload that's submitted, or the overall number of installations that they have, and they divide things up evenly in even percentages. That might make sense if you don't have a diverse range of content on your various JEPs. If anybody's interested in having kind of hey, what works for you, what hasn't worked for you, kind of discussion about how I've done that or what I've learned over the years. If you're a state POC, feel free. Please feel free to reach out to me. It's kind of a daunting thing. When I first started as a state POC many moons ago, there wasn't an answer of how to figure things out. And the way I ended up doing things the way I did with calculating an estimated percentage of an FTE for each of the teams was actually out of an audit from years ago. So we actually many years ago as a state volunteered to be audited so that, and I'm not sure that any other states would be that adventurous or crazy to do that, but we did. And this was 20 years ago. So they were looking for states to be audited, and we volunteered to be audited to be able to come up with more accountability measures to help us track all of the installation activities and so on and so forth. So yeah, so that's kind of how we do things. We have kind of a range of, there are some facilities that are more complicated than others. For instance, there are some facilities that have PFAS. There are some facilities that have a lot of landfills. There are some facilities that have off-site TCE plumes. Depending on what the complexity of the site, we try to use that to lead us in determining whether we need somebody that's an experienced geologist, a brand new out of school geologist, an experienced engineer, a mid-level experienced engineer, and that obviously is going to impact our budget because that'll be impacted by the salary. But yeah, so everything it's important to remember for South Carolina at least, everything's rooted in what is in the JEP and what is that workload that is projected to come in. And there have been times, as I mentioned before, with looking at out years where we have actually staffed up or hired additional resources or additional staff to complete the additional workload that's coming in for a particular job. We don't do that on a temporary basis. So if it's a one-time increase or like a 6-month time period where there's an influx of work, we tend to better look at that from the perspective of, can we share resources, or, you know, is the Army kind of in a waiting mode? Have we finished their reviews? Can that Army staff be reassigned to work on some Navy installations or things like that? But for the situation that I explained earlier, we saw that there was a very huge workload coming in that was going to be 2, 3. It was actually a 20-year contract for a number of years. So we said, okay, we're going to have to hire new staff. And we actually ended up with a team that was like, I think we had 8 people assigned to that one facility. That's an oddity, but that's the benefit of looking at the 2-year cycle you're in versus the 3-year or 3 to 6 year out years planning. So that's all I had to offer right now, unless you want me to address some of these questions that are coming in, or if we want to wait or answer them now.
Those are great points, Stacy. And then that's true, because I do recognize, I mean, because as state managers, we interface with all the 52 state POCs and alternates, and then we interface with all the DOD. So I do hear a lot of frustration, again, with the newer staff trying to figure out how to do a good estimate, because I firmly believe most states, if probably all, I don't have any issues with any of them, that want to create a good budget. And they can only do that based on the information that they have through the JEP and the history. And a lot that, see, like Stacy, you know, because of your history and experience, what things mean. A lot of the new people are really, really struggling with trying to figure out, I'm not going to name names, really struggle with, you know, how to calculate a really good estimate, because they don't want to look bad. And some of that onus lies on the step 2s as well, because it's important. Remember, we talked about putting everything in the JEP. Step 2 is everything you put in that JEP, the state is going to tie a number to that amount. Yeah, there's going to be a dollar amount to everything you put in there. And what often we see happening, at least, with the program execution side, is there will be placeholders put into the active CI cycle. That work may come, it may not, we're not sure, but let's just put it in anyway, just in case. Well, the result is that the work doesn't come. The state budgeted for that work that didn't come. And now it makes the state look like they don't know how to budget. So, and that's a problem.
It is, and building on that, that's why it's important. I mentioned this is a continual process. In the process that you're in, when you're developing a budget, you need to look both ahead to the next 2 years and then years 3 through 6, but you also need to understand, what did you accomplish the previous 2 years? What did you accomplish the 2 years previous to that? Because that can help you build that historical knowledge of how much work are you actually going to complete with I have a lot of we have a lot of teams in South Carolina that are 2 dedicated people. There's an engineer and a geologist. So how much work does that team get done for that installation in a given year? You can look at what was projected to be submitted in the JEP and what was actually submitted during the year, and you can compare those. And then you can use that as, kind of that educated estimate of how much of an FTE do we need moving forward. So you really need to keep track of all of this stuff for the long run, for all of your years.
Thank you, Stacy. I mean, that's exactly what we need, is to understand how that all works. We have a question in the chat, and it's not speaking to the budget, as kind of related though, is what is the percentage of funding that is de-obligated? That is a difficult question, only because different states have different size programs and there is no real average. It's all over the map depending on the workload within each state. And there are some that, I don't know, miraculously, we don't de-obligate them at all. They spent every penny to their budget estimate. There are some that return a significant portion, $600,000. It all depends. I wish I had a better answer for you, but there's no hard, fast average to understand how much is de-obligated within each state for each program. It's sort of all over the map. I wish I had a better answer. So anyway, I digress. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm going to keep an eye on the time because we have till what, 4 o'clock? Sorry, I'm on Central Time. I had a Central Time brain this morning. Let's see, step 4. Good news is we're getting done with the big meat of the 6-step process, and then we're going to move to just what happens after award, and then we're going to do some brief portal navigation. Then Brian has some stuff for you, and then we'll be done. So step 4 is really specific to, you guessed it, step 4 POCs and component POCs. So during the step 4 process, and I think this might be one for Justin. Yes. Essentially, the components look at all the state budgets for all the JEPs, and their step 4s also look at them and help them because there's not that many components and there's an awful lot of JEPs. Justin, you want to speak a little bit more about this, on how the components determine the component approved amount?
Sure, yeah, I can kind of just go through our internal process. Part of my job is to make sure that during this phase that state budgets are reviewed to ensure that they're reasonable, but will cover the entire scope at the installation. So when AEC receives a state's estimate, it goes through our internal review process where it's a little different based on what type of JEP it is. But we typically collaborate with the environmental site managers who will reach back to the installations to make sure that budgets are reasonable and accurate in their view, because they really have the best visibility on the project, so they are able to provide the best insight into the state tasks. But for active Army installation specific JEPs, we use like a 3-phased review process where the ESIMs and the installations will provide the initial review, and then I will provide an intermediate review and execute the step 4 approval in the DSMOA portal. before the component provides the final review and approval. And then for the DPS JEPs, state budgets will just be reviewed by myself, and then they'll go straight to the final review and approval by the component. As Stacy mentioned, she mentioned creating the state budgets can be a difficult process, and just the same, I will say that reviewing the state budgets can also be a very difficult process, really due to the kind of lack of tools at our disposal. We typically, use a comparative analysis where we will compare the budget to historical budgets from the same state, or compared to similar states or similar projects from other states. But it is a difficult process because it relies heavily on professional judgment and comparative analysis. That's all I have, Katie.
Yeah, there's a ton. I mean, the components, there's just 2 people for each program, the component, alternate. And for FUDS, it's a little different because step 4s can move forward. FUDS has a lot. So FUDS has the lion's share. Oops, sorry. I'm just talking. FUDS has the lion's share of joint execution plans within the portal. They have more JEPs than any other component. However, a FUDS property, that JEP is usually really, really small because it's just like 1 or 2 properties that have a couple of sites. Whereas if I were to take something like Hill Air Force Base or Vandenberg or Edwards, any of those things, those JEPs, they may have 1 JEP, but they are enormous. They're 30 some pages long, and they contain many, many sites within them. So it kind of, but all that to say, FUDS has a little different. They get help because they do have so many budgets to look at. And it's a big lift. I very rarely see the components knock back a state budget. Like usually, typically, state will submit the budget, the component reviews it. They will check back like historically, is it trending? It hasn't like J-curved and become, huge. It's much larger than the previous year. And if it seems about right, they usually accept that state budget, that original state budget, as the component approved amount. Keep in mind, the component approved amount is not the amount of money a state will receive as one chunk of change upon award. Awards are based on, we have a funding model that is called the 12-6-6 model. So essentially, components send us, the DSMOA team, 12 months worth of funding for year 1. We want to get people spun up, get working, and move forward. It's very rare that components can acquire that amount of money, 2 years worth of funding. Plus, given how fiscal law works, we just can't do that. So we get the first year of funding in place upon award, usually. Now, there is a case where sometimes components don't get their funding to us when we ask for it, but eventually we get there. So ideally, 12 months worth of funding is awarded. And then for year 2, we'll get 6 months worth of funding. And that is to continue the process. And then the final 6 months of funding is given to the DSMOA team to close out the agreements. And that is how the model works. So your component approved amount, we'll talk a little bit more about this, is not, it's the amount of money that a component can go up to without having to go chase more money. So that it's kind of a line in the sand. It's a ceiling, so to speak. We'll talk about that versus the obligated amount later. So let's go to the next slide. And so we're on to step 5, also with the states. States do have a lot of work to do, and it's really important to notice that this whole process is by design to support the application package that states need to submit by law. And you can see this is the entire package that states need to pull together during step 5, submit it to the DSMOA team. We review it, make sure it's complete and accurate, and it's got everything it needs to have. And then we can actually move out and give the states the agreement to be signed by the state and then return to us to be signed by the grants officer. So if you look at some of these things, so the SF 424 is the grants.gov form where they pull that information where they built that budget and they enter those numbers. So that's what supports that. And see, they have their budget detail, they have their pending attachment A, the JEPs, all that is included in this package. So that's why it's also important to be mindful when we're building these and pulling these together. This is going to feed into that package. Stacy, do you have, I know you have more to say on this one.
I do. And one of the things, again, I'm going to chime in and say I do budgets for other federal agencies. And even though the DSMOA portal and this DSMOA process may seem cumbersome, it is so nice to have it all laid out step by step, and that it, you know, in this portal, and that it builds the application for you. Not all federal agencies do that. And I have actually recommended to other agencies, Brian, that they reach out to you all and get some suggestions, Katie, on how to do things better. That doesn't necessarily always happen. But anyway, this is where me as a state POC, I have to collaborate with our financial POCs to make sure that there haven't been any budget changes like indirect rates, rates for our insurance rates, things like that, or benefits rates, that's what it is. Because sometimes your budget can change between the time you put in your estimated budget and get it approved, and so the time in the beginning of the calendar year until the time that you actually submit the application. And that's okay, that can happen. If you have questions about that, or kind of what impact it may have, you can always reach out to your state's funds manager. But kind of tricks of the trade, I would recommend, there is a very formulated order of documents in the portal for developing the application. One of the things I love to do is I put a cover letter on the application when I put it together, and I put everything in order that it is on the portal to make sure that I can check everything off and make sure it's in there. One of the other things that I was able to do years ago, this was many years ago before our agency kind of combined our overhead and our IT resources, is I have a full version of Adobe Pro to allow me to build PDFs to build the application. That was an amazing thing, and I was able to purchase that through our DSMOA funds years ago. Now that's all part of our overhead costs to keep up with that. But if you don't have that capability, that is very helpful to be able to combine all these documents and get them signed and make sure you have one document to submit in your application. Again, reaching out to your funds manager if you have questions, don't ever hesitate to ask them if you're not sure of anything or what step you need to be in. And then make sure that you allow time for your signature process, because you have to make sure that you go based on your key contacts and get the authorized signatures. So like, again, in our situation, we've had a change in our agency, so those signatories have changed, and luckily there's the ability to get electronic signatures now, which has expedited that. But again, back in the olden days, we had to actually chase people down to get wet signatures. Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add from kind of a smaller program perspective?
No, I agree with everything you said. I think small programs still, again, need to do the same thing as everybody else. I think this step 5 takes a little bit of focus and attention to making sure that you get all the pages in the right order and filled out correctly. I will mention there is, I think it's a step budget breakdown, total step 3. I think that form is generated by the portal, so make a note of that. And then another thing to make note of is that audit information at the end. What I do is I take a screenshot of the state auditor's annual report page, and then I provide a web link to that state auditor page for those reporting. So that was a little bit different for typical grant applications, but that auditor information at the end, that one's not such a big hurdle if you can just do a screenshot and add the web link to that. Otherwise, I think that this process is well laid out. It just takes a little bit of time and focus to get through it.
Thanks, Mark. And then that's true. You can always go back. The portal is wonderful because it does house all the previous applications. And that's all laid out within the portal. So you can actually refer back to, if you're a new person, refer back to what was submitted before and update and use that as a reference. That's always very helpful. Let's go to the next slide because now I see it's 2:01. So I better pick up the pace a little here. Let's see, we didn't see a packet. Next slide, please. So the award, and as you all know, most of the time, the award goes pretty smoothly. It did not go smoothly this year, and I apologize completely. We had a lot of extenuating factors, some of it which is out of our control. For example, having the CR, or our budget coming in late. It trickled down, so funding did not hit the DSMOA team because we have to have funding available to put on the agreements before award. That funding, which usually comes in at the beginning of May, did not come in until the end of June. As you know, award is July 1. And to the credit of all the state people here, the state POCs, and I'm going to also shout out to our DSMOA team, the financial managers, grants officers. We worked late and we were able to award all 52 agreements in, let's see, I think we did it in 8 days. And we were able to get all those agreements in place. And I think California was a little delayed because they had some questions. So they didn't get awarded until the 3rd. But that's kind of a phenomenal achievement as far as I'm concerned, because pulling those agreements first, getting state signatures, getting the funding in place, getting the grant, posting it. I thought we did really well. So I'm giving myself a high five. Hooray. And everybody else who was involved. But typically, if you look at the schedule, we have to award at least, let's see, weeks to award. Thanks. Like at least 5 weeks to do the award and work it through. But that didn't happen this time. But I'm hopeful that this next cycle around, things will settle down and it will go back to normal like it used to be, because I don't really want to go through that again. So we talked about this. These are the things that we need to do. We request funding from the DoD components for year 1. That's that 1266 model we talked about, not the whole component approved amount. And then come July 1, we, hit the ground running and we keep moving forward. And then at that time, we initiate closeout for the previous CA cycle. So then we do it all over again. So let's go. Wait, I want to make sure. Let's go to the next slide. And that is, which slide did I come on? Oh, this is just, now that we'll just pretend, we are in our active cycle now for 24-26. We had that award to all the way. So what we will be coming up on is the first, at the bottom, the annual funding review. We have 2 annual funding reviews. And like I mentioned earlier, the point of an annual funding review is to be able to tweak the budgets, the state budgets, so that we are tracking to make sure money can be, if excesses are identified. In some cases, we've had a few issues with new determination of fiscal law that's made the program a little less agile than we used to be, as far as putting funding from one state and giving it to another, as long as it's within the same program, Air Force IR to Air Force IR, for example. We can do that in some cases, but now not in every case. So it's kind of a problem, but that's our problem, not yours. But our annual funding review allows the states to revisit what they initially put in, and then revise it. They take essentially the number of invoices they have sitting on their desk and compare it to what's current in the portal and reconcile. So they're saying, our new budget is this. Now, typically, unless this is an opportunity for states to ask for additional money or return excess funds. During year 1, we don't see a lot of change because, and maybe the state budgets drop. They do, because usually during year 1, there isn't as much work. Things really get fired up in year 2. So we'll usually see state budgets go down for year 1, then up for year 2. So that's typical. Components don't typically change the component approved amount unless they need to increase funding. So that's, I keep saying typically because, you know, components get to do what they want, but you know, that's the way it is for them. So we will have our annual funding review coming up. Let's go to the next slide. Because now we're talking post-award, and now we're in there. So I alluded to CA's component approved amount versus obligated amount. So essentially the component approved amount is the amount for that full 2-year cycle. Whereas the obligated amount is how much money we have right now that we can provide and you can bill against. So obligated is very different. Obligated amount, states should not exceed their obligated amount. If they are closing in on about expending 80% of their obligated amount, they need to submit an 80% notification. And the purpose of that notification is to allow us time to acquire those fundings and then produce the mod to increase the funding that's been requested. And that notification includes a justification as well. Let's see, max amount. I want to see if Stacy, would you like to speak a little bit more? Everybody has different ways of expressing what component approved amount versus obligated amount. I have a DoD perspective, but states think of it differently sometimes.
Sure. I actually, one of the things I was going to add is I actually track 3 different amounts. So I track the amount we applied for, so our application amount. Then I also track the component approved amount and the obligated amount because they all mean different things. So, and it gives you different things that you can kind of project on throughout the year. It's one of the things that I've struggled with over the years as we've had upper management change. It's been a challenge to get them to understand, as Katie mentioned, the 1266 funding or the fact that you're not automatically always approved for the amount you applied for, and you're not always obligated the amount that you're approved for. It is, so again, I've found success in explaining it to them from the perspective of, you know, it's a commitment to providing resources for the workload that is projected in our joint execution plans. And, you know, again, we need to be cognizant and aware of the fact that the DoD funding process is complicated and it's cumbersome and it's a multi-year process, and they don't get all of their funding all at one time. So that's been one of the things that through the years has helped me in getting our upper management to feel comfortable with doing things like hiring additional staff for an influx of work, or understand why we need to move funding from one area to another. So again, it just because you're not approved for the entire amount you applied for, or you're not obligated the amount that you are approved for, doesn't mean that it's a hard no and you will never get that amount of funding in your program. It's, again, it's intended to be this 2-year process where we submit 80% notifications that we're reaching 80% of our obligated amount and we need some additional funds to complete the work and things like that. So again, kind of the broken record is it's important to keep up with the workload and the funding throughout the 2-year cycle.
Cool. Thanks, Stacy. One thing to remember, though, is like the 80% notification is not designed to tell the states yes or no they can have funding. It really comes down, especially if it's within the obligated amount. If you have a component approved amount here and they've spent maybe 1/3 of that and they're requesting an additional 1/3, so it's still within the component approved amount, the 80% notification is to allow us time, if we do not have funding on hand, to go and work with the component to secure those fundings. It's not really intended to tell the states, you know, we see that you need additional funding, but we're not going to give it to you. Because if a component is saying, we're not going to give you any more money, even though it's within that component approved amount, then there needs to be a conversation about scope of work, reduction of scope of work, because the state gave a price tag for the amount of work within that 2-year cycle. And if there is a reduction in the scope, if the component may not be able to acquire that. We've got all kinds of weirdo funding things going on with the government, again, well beyond our control. So it's a little certain, there just needs to be a conversation if a component can't, secure additional funds to honor that request. Let's see. So we already talked about that. I'm going to keep moving forward if that's okay with Stacy, Mark, and Justin. I think we had notes on that, but I feel like we need to keep going. Yay. Okay. Yay. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, and to see, I already talked all about this one already, so I just got a little ahead of myself because, I get excited about weirdo things like, 12-6 expanding and 80% notifications. Let's go to the next slide. I think we can do that. Performance reports. So there's also another requirement for states, and I'm saying this, and I do want step 2, step 4, whoever is on the DoD side to pay attention, because this is a great tool and another opportunity for communication. States are required to submit performance reports for each year, year 1 and year 2. And they include the criteria. They have to say, go through each and every JEP, and did they meet the objectives of the tasks included in that JEP? Or did they meet the objectives of that JEP as a whole? They can say they met it, and then that doesn't require any explanation. If they select partially met, or not met, then they are required to supply a reason, a justification, or not really justification. What happened? Why was it not met? Or why was it only partially met? And there could be a whole host of reasons there. It could be, and I will say by and large, one of the most common responses, they weren't provided the document to review. So that's something that can call attention to, perhaps. And step 2 is you can look at the performance reports as components and see what the states are running into trouble with. Now, it could be on the state side, maybe they're assigned POC. We did have somebody got in a car accident, and they were the only person assigned to that JEP that knew what was going on, couldn't meet the objectives of that joint execution. So things happen. So it's not meant to be punitive in nature. It's really also meant to open up a dialogue as to how things are tracking for year 1 and 2 for that joint execution plan. So, and I'll show you where those live in the portal when we get a chance. Stacy, I know you have stuff on this too, which is awesome.
I do. Again, this is kind of from our experience of my experience over the last 20 some odd years. So there are a lot of things that our partnering teams do in real time, and they adjust and they kind of pivot on what they're working on. So what we have each of our project managers do is they track every document that comes in and every review that goes out, every site visit that they go to, every partnering meeting that they go to, and they go over those with their counterpart at DoD. So it's an open line of communication for everything that's on our desk of what we have in process or that we've sent out. And our teams they've adapted, and they've got different ways that they use that. Some of them, they use something called a document tracker, and it helps them. That's where they prioritize, okay, the team has 6 documents in house. What is EPA going to review first? What's the state going to review first? So it helps lead that dialogue and work planning within the team. It doesn't necessarily get translated back to changing the JEP, because those 6 documents or 7 documents that they're trying to manage are in the JEP. So we track them in a spreadsheet, and it helps us keep up with, again, all of the workload that's in-house and in process, et cetera. And we do that every year, and periodically through the year, as we have team meetings with our DoD counterparts, our project managers share their spreadsheets with them. They talk through them. They've adapted them again to prioritize document reviews. And then that's what we use at the end of the year to say, yes, we met our commitments or not. But it's also what I use, again, to kind of do that look back to help me in future years in developing our budget in the FTEs needed for each of the facilities or the installations. So I don't know that every state does that. We find it very helpful in South Carolina. Some people, some states don't really like that extra accountability measure, but as an engineer, I live in terms of spreadsheets. So for me, it's a wonderful thing. But I do think that it's helpful for teams to have things like a document tracker or an exit strategy to help lead them in planning that process and expediting that process. There's like I mentioned before, there's a lot of times where there may be 6 documents that are planned to be submitted, but they're their exact same kind of document. So we can just review them all at once and knock 6 documents out with one review. So that's a good tool that states can use to work with their DoD counterparts.
Very good. Thanks, Stacy and Mark. I know you had an input onto the slide as well.
Oh, I think that you've covered all of it. I think that, yeah, I think I have nothing more than what you've said.
Okay, that's okay, because we're coming down to the wire. We've done award. We're in a current agreement, so I think now we're performance reports. Thank you all for hanging in there. It's just such a great honor to be talking with you all today, and I love working with you guys. So hang on, we are now to the next slide. Oh, see, and I really did get ahead of myself a lot. If you have any questions on annual funding review, I was going to let Stacy, did you want to say just a few things about the annual funding review on your end? Because I kind of did all of my main talking points previously.
I think we covered everything that I was going to say about that.
I really do. And then, so the next slide, because I think we go into the obligated amount again, 80% obligation notification and request. That is, we did have a question, and it was, so when you click that button in the portal, with your 80% notification, that notification goes to the DSMOA team, and it also goes to the component. Now, if the request is going to exceed the component approved amount, it will go directly to the component, because they will need to increase that component approved amount before we can do anything, at the USACE team. If it is within the component approved amount, then if we have the funding on hand, we can cut that mod right away and usually go ahead and send that funding immediately. If we don't have the funding on hand, we will have to work with the component, but there's no need to change the component approved amount. So that is the one thing that can be the hang up, is either if we have funds available or we don't. If we don't, we've got to go chase them down. Any questions on obligated 80% obligation? And the big reason we want you to notify us when you're 80% within, because if you go to 100% expended, then by law, you are at risk for not being reimbursed. And there's no buffer time for us to go chase the money if we have to do that. So when you're getting close, it's better to give us time so that we can work it out before you hit that 100% mark. So let's go to the next slide. Let's see, state reimbursement. This will be real light because there's, a whole host of state financial POCs. We, DSMOA, have 3 very wonderful, well, actually 4 right now, state financial managers and funds managers that work with those counterparts. But what I can see for here is we really encourage for a state to submit their payments at least at the minimum quarterly, if not monthly. Many states do monthly, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's reimbursable and there is a lag. There's always a lag to what is reflected in the portal and what invoices that are coming your way. And there's a delicate balance, as I know people like Dustin know. There's going to be a reconciliation that will need to be done with the invoices that are piling up on the desk versus how much money you have in the portal. If you are billing monthly, the amounts within the portal are most likely to reflect, they're going to align better with what's in the portal and how much you need and how close you are to needing more. If you don't bill very often, what will happen is you'll know that you're going to run out of money very quickly, but the portal's going to show that you have quite a lot available. The only way the component knows that you really do need more money and you need it right away is to look in the portal. And if they see that you have, you're saying you're 80% expended, but you haven't billed and you've got $100,000 sitting there ready, available for billing, they're going to not prioritize that request. So frequent billing is a good thing for everybody involved. Stacy, I know you've got stuff on that too.
I was just going to reiterate. So through the years, I've had financial managers that started off billing quarterly. We coached them up and expressed the benefits of billing monthly. We had a dedicated person. They billed monthly. Everything was great, and it was very much more in line. We've recently gone through a transition, and we've kind of gone back to more quarterly billing. So now my goal is to coach the new people up to explain the benefits of monthly billing, because monthly billing definitely is the way to go.
Yes, so that's what we're going to say on state reimbursement for that. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And here we are at closeout. Hooray for closeout. We are currently in closing out 22-24, which has been interesting this year around, this go around. The states have 90 days from July 1 to September 30th to submit all their invoices and make sure all their performance reports are completed for year 2. They should have them done for year 1 already. Once those 2 things are satisfied, then the grants officer will sign and provide a letter of closeout for the agreement. It's really important to make sure we get all those invoices in. If you need an extension, that is fine. You just submit that extension letter, and I have copies. So anybody out there, I think we are in closeout. I've already received a lot of requests for extensions, so I think we're probably kind of past that. But for some reason, if you need one, let me know, or let your state manager know, because if you don't get all your invoices in and we close out, we can't provide funding for any other invoices that show up. So, maybe there's a onesie twosie out there that you didn't realize was coming, but we've already closed out. We really, well, I'll say not without a lot of difficulty, reopen the agreement and then have to provide funding. It gets real messy real fast. So it's better to get an extension and get it all in and be absolutely certain you've got all your invoices covered, rather than to hurry up, close out, and then, oh no, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't see coming or you didn't expect. So that is my advice to you on closeout. Stacey, do you have anything to add on that? If not, I'm going to move forward.
I do not. I will just say there's a question in the chat about what's the deadline to submit an extension for a closeout.
There's no real deadline to submit for an extension. You would ideally want to request an extension by, well, no, yes, I take that back. There totally is. And it would be September 30th. Of course, the end of the fiscal year is when we want that to close out. So you want to submit that extension in the event that it's just getting later, because we've had extenuating Hurricane Maria is a perfect example of state being super delayed in closeout and not even submitting extension because their whole island was offline. It was real tough. So, the grants officers make those calls, but I would certainly think that if you needed to still submit an request for extension, please do so. Go ahead and do that. Other than that, that is it. So thank you guys for hanging in there. I do have portal navigation, but that is the bulk of the presentation. And also be aware that as we move into the kickoff for 26-28, we do micro trainings throughout the process. And we'll do, hey, here's how to step 2. Remember how to build that, Jeff? So those, keep an eye out. We'll be advertising those because we would never leave you hanging. Thank you. Yeah, we're rock and roll, aren't we, today? And so here we are at our lovely DSMOA portal, which I will say, prior to the portal, I've heard, because I wasn't part of the program this time, but Stacy was, that DSMOA was sort of a beast. It was all done through emails and spreadsheets and everything you can imagine. And there were many, many state managers on the USAID side, and it was quite the headache, right, Stacy?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was. So
Yes,
the
it was.
portal, yeah, so the steering committee was formed, and that has representatives on it from all the components, and of course headed by OSD. And then I think 9 different state representatives, and those alternate over time. And the beautiful thing about this particular portal is that it was built collaboratively with the states and DoD together. So its functionality is, I would say, through the roof as far as, you know, one of those kind of things where we interface together. And when you sign on to the portal, you have to have a registered account to be in the portal. We do screen those folks when they submit a registration, because we don't really allow just anybody to have an account. You have to have a working role to be in this system. So nobody from the public can just get an account and start, you know, poking around. This is just meant, it's a tool. It's really a tool to foster collaboration. So you come to the homepage, and first thing you're going to see is this. And I am very sorry. I'll apologize to the entire community that we now are subject to all of the password requirements that are being pushed upon to the DoD. So that is coming November 20th, and you'll have to have those big long passwords. However you do it, I don't want to know how you do it. Just do whatever you do to make those passwords work, and then you'll have to change them every 6 days. And I know that's a problem because there are some people who only go into the portal when it's time to build a new CA. And so they'll have to internally, states, actually everybody will have to work out some kind of system within them, you know, for their own agency to figure out how to make that work. The homepage itself has quite a lot of information on it. When we talk about the role charts here, I actually have to use this myself frequently because it is a role-based system. If you are a step 2, you can do certain things. It'll come up quickly. If you are a step 2 alternate, there are things you can do and other things you can't. The important thing, the takeaway here is only the primaries have the role or the permission to complete an action in the portal. So you can follow down and see, sure, your alternates can view JEPs, they can add activities, they can add and create budgets. What they cannot do is lock the state budget. They can't lock the activities. And the same goes for a step 2. Your step 2 alternates can put in tasks and subtasks. They can do those things. What they can't do is lock the JEC, because that's the final step, and the ownership of that role is the primary step 2. Components kind of like kept God rights, they can do everything and anything in the portal. But that's something you can reference if you go into the portal and you're not seeing something you think you should be seeing. Check the roles and make sure you have the proper one. We also have our schedule posted here. So when I talked about downloading it, you certainly can do it here. Just click it and it opens up. We have our policy and guidance page. Here, we post everything and anything we can think of that relates to DSMOA. So if you look at the Dodgers, you can. If you want to pull the DERP manual, you can do that too. And all kinds of memos, some doing, you know, dealing with the guard that go, some go way, way back. So we try to keep that current as possible. However, so that's the homepage in a nutshell. We go to the CA management, and this is really where people live. This is where the magic occurs. So you know, we are in the DSMOA training portal, not the production site. So I messed around with this so I could show you certain examples. For example, we're in, this is the one we're closing up here. Now you'll notice that you guys won't see this. That's for me because I'm special. So for administering stuff through the portal, but you should see all of these other things in there. We are currently in this CA cycle, and what I did was yesterday I went ahead and turned on these pages. During a CA cycle development, you will not see all these at one time. They turn on and off based on deadlines, just like I told you, pages disappear. But for this training purpose, I turned them all on in our training so that you could see how they look. For example, here's the installation prefix. This is what a component will see when they are adding installations or reviewing what is currently there. And they can simply go in here and change it as they see fit. They can remove it, unchecking boxes and click those changes and make them disappear. They can add new installations as well. When we go to the state installation or state election, this is how we, the state comes in here and just clicks a button. I can't turn the button on anymore because we're out of that cycle, but that's the step one. Step two is the big one that we're going to talk about. During step two, depending on your assignment, you should see, I see all of them, of course, because I'm assigned to all of them, but depending on who you're with, whether you're, with the Army or Air Force, you're going to see your specific list of joint execution plans. As these are completed, you will see the progress reflected in this table to the side. And we're going to go ahead and just pick on Aberdeen Proving Ground. Step two, this is what you will do. You will go into step two. You will select the title. If it has a blue hyperlink, that means that it's a live link that you can click. And it's going to ask you a question. You have an option to create an entirely blank JEP, which most people don't do if one is already existing. Or you can copy a different JEP. This is the JEP from 22-24. Essentially, step two is you would leave this the same, because what you're going to do is you're going to pull the 22-24 into 24-26, unless you want to do something different and crazy, because these can be changed. You can actually copy JEPs from different CA cycles. You can copy from, now, if I were only Army, it would only show Army ones. You can copy from a different state if you want. You can copy a different installation if you want. So you got a lot of options here. Ideally, though, what you're going to do is say, yeah, I want the same JEP from the last CA cycle, and I want to pull it into the next CA cycle. So you would copy that JEP. And it tells us to be patient. And what it does is now it has opened the joint execution plan so that you can now edit it, add tasks, remove tasks, subtasks, all that stuff. Be aware that these functions on this side have nothing to do with what is contained within the JEP. These only relate to the actual project site. For example, if I want to edit this, all it's going to say is you're going to change the name or you're going to change the note. And that is it in a nutshell. You can copy it. And this is a handy tool. For example, if you have something, what I've done before is you can actually copy the project site. Say they're very similar sites, right? And you don't want to go through, you want what's contained within this JEP in another one. You can take that, you can copy it, and maybe paste that name in there. And instead of west, you put south, save and exit, and it is going to add that JEP in here at the bottom, most likely. Where did you go? And so that, in that sense, you can now click on it. It even copied the note. By the way, I had a question earlier about prioritizing things. You can use the note fields for the project site, for the task site, or the subtask. They all contain opportunities to put in clarifying details with each of those. This note is meetings, sorry, went off it, for the ECA. Now, if you want to edit what's in the JEP itself, you have to click on the name of the JEP. And what that does is open the JEP itself. Since we're in step 2 DoD, it's going to look just like this. And here is the other opportunity to prioritize. You can move these tasks up and down just really to meet your own organizational needs, however you want to do it. We talked about out years, and here are all the out years right here. They did contain them, which is super handy because come the next cycle, what they can simply do at this point is they can come in here and roll this into either year 1, year 2. If there's a little bit of uncertainty, you can do years 1 through 2, and you can change that right then and there. And then you can add your notes here as well, looking at all remediation sites. So you may have to change that. And also be mindful that every task must have at least one subtask, because you can't have a goal without a plan. So you need to have the plan in place. And so you may want to add subtasks. If we were to add a new task to this current site here, you would come over here and add and manage tasks. And that is done just by clicking on and off buttons. Maybe the feasibility study step. Maybe you need to, sorry, dog. I lost my train of thought, or you know, maybe there's a 5-year, whatever it is, you can find it here. Now, it could be that there is something specific you really, really want to include, and it's not really spelled out in this selection here, and that is fine. All you need to do is pick what comes closest to it and then add your note to clarify what you mean by that. If you don't see it here, you can also come to, it says custom task, but that's a lie. There's no customization here, but it is a different list of other things that you can put in, whether it be an additional investigation. If you do use this list, you just got to make sure you hit the add button so it shows up in this box and the box is checked. Then you save changes. And see, it's telling me it's going to delete that one I unchecked. It's going to let you know. So it's fine because this is not, this is just a production or not production. Same thing with subtasks. You come over here and you hit add a subtask, and same kind of a list apply, but this is going to be all your drafts and the reports and things like that that kind of meet that goal of the final product. And you want to use your project here. This is where you put in your out years if you need to, the 3 through 6, and you can click whatever you like, select your project year, and save your changes. And then it will just keep building on that. So it's super handy and it's real time. It's actually a really powerful tool. Now, if you're working through and reviewing all the sites, one of the other things I would recommend, instead of using the return button to go in and out of this page, you can simply just scroll through each and every one of these sites. Aberdeen is a really big JEP. I'm not sure why I picked that one because it's really big. But so you can just navigate through, review what's there, uncheck, check whatever you need to, update as needed. Any questions on that? Because I'm sharing my screen and now I can't see the chat box. So feel free to just shout out a question or somebody let me know if there's something out there. When you are all done, you can hit return. And remember, I talked about the jolly green button. Here it is, our favorite button in the whole world, because that, you know, checks the box, it finalizes the action. You can click this. Another thing you can do, if you happen to have a really large JEP, I'm going to give you an example right now. Set installation task complete. It should give me a message. Oh, it didn't. Okay. Here is the message it gave me, and I know it because I added that site and I added no task to it. If you don't add a task or subtask to it, the system will let you know, and you'll need to go back and fix it. However, in really large JEPs, it can be hard to find and figure out where it's missing. So what we've done, or what the portal does, is it allows you to come down here and select a report. You can check for omitted tasks and subtasks and click that box. And what it will do is tell you where that missing piece is at, and it's denoted by an asterisk. So you don't have to go through this enormous entire JEP. It's got to be there somewhere. I thought it was in out years. Did I do out years? Yeah. And they got a ton of out years in here. So it's going to let you know. Maybe I should make the window bigger. Oh, there it is. Here's this Canal Creek South. So these are actually missing a subtask, and you have to have those. State can't put anything in if there's nothing there. So you'll want to make sure you check for that. And that is an easy way to do so. So we'll go back and we'll fix that by, I'm going to just delete that site out. And now I should, always stress should, be able to set those installation tasks complete. Once I do so, and I'll be impatient. I'm such a button pusher and I click multiple times and I make our automation team crazy. So now it's saying what you'll see now, and you know you're successful when it says it's moved to set your state activities complete. So once you click that button, the state is going to receive an email saying this jet is ready for your activities. So they will be notified. So it's not just sitting out there and people are twiddling their thumbs. And you'll also know to confirm when you hit return, you have been awarded a green circle with a white checkbox saying installation tasks have been completed. So for the next step, we would go to, and now we're going to put our state hat on, and we want to click on it again. But this time, we need the state to edit this. So we would, where was the site? I scroll down, click on that, and we'll say state edit here. And it's a little wonky just because typically this all doesn't show up at once. But this is where the state can go ahead and enter their activities. And they can do it through here just by checking boxes. And don't panic because, sorry. Oh, look, it's a call from the principal office. I will get him later. It's on my phone. And sorry, this is where you can add all those tasks here, and you can add a note, and you can come over here and see this is a way that the DoD counterpart put in a note for you states saying this is what we need from you. This is what's going to happen associated with this particular subtask, even though final report is strange. So you may pick conference calls. Typically, here are those DPS ones. Ideally, I would love to have these particular ones show up only when it's a DPS jet. That would make things infinitely easier and cleaner, but it doesn't do that right now. But I do have that on my wish list. So you can pick those and they will stick. There's no save button here. You just check them and move forward. Or you can go just like the task subtask is add and manage and check boxes as you need to and save changes here and they will be added. And that is how you start building that jet back and forth. When that is completed, you hit the return button and you look for that, everybody, jolly green button to set activities complete. Oh yeah, see, okay. So now we can look for those admitted tasks. In fact, let's go back since we got that one. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to take time because I know where I look on. Where did I see that? And if you see it before I do, oh, okay. So there it is right there. I didn't put the subtasks in there. APRO. We just go back in there real quick. Actually, I might just delete that entirely. Yep. That should do. That was the one I picked, right? We'll find out in a minute. Set them a complete. That's the other one. Okay, fine. Or did I do the LTM? That's gone. Go, go, go. Yay. So now you have your tasks, subtasks, activities all together. It comes back to the DoD component, the step 2, essentially, to review everything that was put in here. DoD step 2 is a good trick that you can use here. And what I would recommend, instead of thinking you need to go into all of these, I personally recommend coming back to the reports and just pulling this one with state activity and notes, because then you're going to see everything in one place. And I think it makes it much easier to review. So if I click that, oh, everything's so big. I actually pulled this up before. So I had it ready, but what you're going to see is this. And then you can see it all in one page instead of having to go in and out of every single, oh, there it goes, every single one of those. Because this is actually a very complicated joint execution plan. If you agree with everything that the state put in, then you can go ahead and lock it. If you don't, please reach out to the state and ask them just for some clarifying details so that you better understand it. We lock the Jeff here. And this will actually complete step 2. If something gets missed, if you lock a Jeff and then you're like, no, I need to open it again, or the state asks, just contact the state manager, because we do have the ability during that window to roll it back and open things up. So you can spin your wheels for about 3 minutes on something, but at the end of the day, just reach out to us and we'll get you sorted right away. So now, and you can go back in and unlock it yourself too. So that's Jeff building in a very, very brief nutshell. Once we get to that, we get to state budget, and that opens. And now you will see Aberdeen Proving Ground. There are no numbers in here at the time, but what for states, what typically happens is you will look back at your previous budget for the previous CA cycle and see if the same things are included in your tracking. So the state budget looks like this. Come on. There we go. I'm sorry, I have a really slow computer. I mean, she's a good girl, but kind of on her last leg. There we go. Open. And we'll go. Adobe has been weird. So this is a sample of state budget, and it's very, very simple. You know, you've got your direct labor, travel. So notice nobody puts anything for equipment. They do put supplies. Usually that's 5K or less. Supplies meaning office paper or things like that. There can be contracts. Contractors can be hired to assist you in reviewing documents. That is allowable. There's indirect rates. And then the out years, here's their out year estimates for that. So that is what a state budget looks like from here. And I will have to put in something, close that. Again, always clicking on the name of the installation to complete the action. I'm just like putting $10 in here because you have to have something in there for it to move forward. At least $1. If it looks good, the state POC blocks it. If you are a state alternate POC, you will want to contact the state POC and let them know you are done with the budget and it needs to be locked, because you will not be able to do that. So then you hit return. And now you see that is locked. This DoD viewable is sometimes states are able to put in their budgets very quickly. And in order to give components, so during step 4, like Justin was saying, there is a lot to review, and it's a huge heavy lift for the components to review each and every state budget and make sure they're tracking properly from their side. You can go in and make it DoD viewable so that they can get an early start in reviewing their budgets. It's a courtesy. It's not a have to. At the end of step 3, they all open up. But if you're done early, I highly recommend going ahead and letting the components get started on that. And that kind of looks like this window here. You can just click open, and now your DoD component, Justin, can see this Jeff and get started on the review early. And that's, again, it's a courtesy. It's very nice to do, especially from their perspective. Have you ever used this, Justin, by the way? He may not be on anymore. So I'll keep going. Step 4, component approved amount. We're not going to see a whole lot here. Again, I'm just sampling through here. So what happens is, so everybody understands, when it comes time to review the state budgets, the component and their alternates will come in here and they'll look at it. They'll look at the JEP here in this corner. They pull those open. I'm not going to because I won't spend the time. And then if they concur, there's actually a button where the step 4 will hit approve, and that will pull that number into here. And then a component looks at it and they'll have a button approve, and then it is done. And so that's how that process works there. They have a summary on here. Oh, there was another question that I really didn't mean to ask. And somebody said, is there a timeline for an update to a JEP? And I will tell you that a JEP update, I've seen them completed in 1 day. I've seen them completed in 6 months. It all depends on how much engagement you have with your counterparts. If a step 2 is like, we got a document and we're going to need to review this quickly, I'm going to add it to the JEP, and they give the state a heads up that if this update is going to be initiated, it can go very, very quickly. Conversely, if the step 2 puts it in there, then the state will get an email. They may or may not do it, you know. So if you want something done very quickly, I would say you're going to need to pick up the phone and send an email specifically for that. Not that they won't get to it, it's just everybody's got lots going on and is not everybody overextended already. So here we go. There's the summary. And so let's see, state election. So step 5 is state election. We talked a little bit at length of putting that together. And the cool thing about the portal is it has instructions on how to pull that application together. And then everything, every form that you need to compile that application is contained on this page. Your SF-424s, A and B, and then the main one, you can get your certifications that need to be signed by your certificate of authority here. You can get your designation for certificate of authority here as well. That needs to be signed, states that's by your attorney designating a person within your agency to bind the state in this legal agreement. And then, of course, to sign a signature card, that is for a financial person to be able to sign the SF-270s for reimbursement. And if you come down here even farther, because this is a big, long page, there's more instructions. And all those reports that we showed that are listed here, you just pull directly from the portal because it was all stuff that you built during step 3. So you can pick your state. I'll just pick it up. And then those forms pop up, and here they are hyperlinked. And these will just, you can just click each one, download them as a PDF. I don't know why I clicked on that, but you can download each one of these as a PDF and pull them into your application. And that's how that works there. Let's see. And then let's see, six step award status. Just pretend I didn't say that. Is where states and DoD alike can come and see the progress of their application in real time. Well, as close to real time as we can. What we do as state managers, we go through every application, we make sure it's all complete. And as we look at all the forms, we check these boxes as we go. So we check, you know, when the state uploads the application to the portal, because states do not send us the application, they use DocStore to upload their application. We get a notification, then we go in there and we start taking a look at it and making sure it's correct. And as we do that, we check these boxes all the way from to state audit. And then once we determine that it is complete, state application complete starts here. That's when we start generating the agreement. There's a whole nother set of steps that come along with that package. And so we track, and again, states, you guys can all come in here and see where we're at. You know, we do the best we can, as we are human sometimes, and we miss things on occasion, but not very often. But you know, this is how you can see your progress being tracked. And here, by the way, you can see all these awards that went out very quickly. This is posted to the portal. So this means this is when we actually put them on here. This is not when the award occurred. It's the grants officer's signature is when the award occurred. So you can see most of those went out very, very quickly this CA cycle. And then finally, now that we have the award complete, I'm going to just go real quick here and talk about performance reports. Performance reports. This is where you can go year 1, year 2 and submit the, should be coming up. If not, okay. I can do this really quick because again, we're on training. So it's a little, just because of all the weirdo deadlines. Hang on. I'm actually pulling production right now. So now this is no longer training, this is live. And here's our performance reports right here. And you can see we should have most for year 2 are all done. There were about 1,400 JEPs this cycle. And so once again, for state POCs or step 2 POCs, you can come in here and see what was accomplished, what wasn't accomplished, and why. What happened? Those are always good questions. And what happened and how can we make it better? This note says the principal activities described in the JEP were performed. Some project deliverables were not received for review during that time frame. We see that a lot. That's common, but it's a great time to start opening a dialogue to, well, why were they not received? Maybe DoD step 2s need to go back to their team and ask questions about what's happening there, see what's going on. So that's a great, and it's a wonderful, powerful tool to have. And then finally, here is our active cycle. I guess this would be out of cycle because we're not building a CA right now, but I call it the current CA. And if you want to update a JEP, you click JEP update. And you come into here and you can see we have already 30 updates since July 1 in draft form in the process of being updated. One little thing to keep in mind, step 2s, is it always defaults to draft JEPs. And I get this question a lot that, oh no, I don't see my JEP. Well, that's because we have to hit this tab over here. And I forget to do that too. So you want to go to your JEP list first and then look for the JEP that you wish to update. And when you find it, you propose the update. And by clicking this button, it's going to pull this off of here and put it on the draft JEP list, and it will appear here and you'll have to initiate it. So, and then a JEP update is like a mini 6-step process. It goes through the same steps as you would for a regular CA cycle. You add the tasks, you add the activities. Let's see when I need to get on. You do the budget, you lock the, or well, you lock the JEP, do the budget, and then it goes through the whole process all the way to component approved amount. So it can go, again, it can go as fast or slow as you want it to go. And finally, and this will be the last part, and don't worry everybody, because as we move through, we do training throughout the year and we just break this all apart to little, like little sound bite, little clips to help remind people. POC management. If you click on POC management, you will be able to see who is assigned to the JEPs currently. Now, you'll notice that this number of folks is way bigger than the number of JEPs we currently have in there. And that is because this represents everybody active in the portal. Maybe this JEP is, the JEP is not active in this CA cycle, but it was in the previous, still going to show up here. So, and you can usually tell because they won't have assignments to all my stuff, but we'll go back to Aberdeen because, and there's Walter. He is the guard POC, just so you know. Let's pick on, how about a little FUD site? We can see who's assigned to the site. And as a step 2, all you want to do to make sure you want some alternates. Step 2s can have 3 and an alternate step 4. Step 2s can make this happen. Components can make this happen. You find their name, you assign the person, and hit save. Same thing with state POCs. You find their name and click add, and it will move them over to that, and they are now assigned to it. Same thing works for taking them off. And I do recommend trying to keep these things current because, as my automation people say, every dead account or inactive account is a hole in the security system. So we really try to keep this accounts updated as needed. Click close. I'm not going to save that. The other way to do it really quick here is to click the people tab. And this, you can find a person. If you're looking for somebody specifically, then you can, and I'm going to filter a little bit here just to show you what people are assigned to. FUDs usually has a ton of people managing, or a single person managing many sites. For example, where is Josh? Go with Josh. Josh is currently assigned to 78 joint execution plans. Now, were Josh to leave, and I'm going to say this to components or step 4s, it is really important to before you transfer over to globally replace him. Because if you don't globally replace him with a person, you will have to assign these one at a time. And by that, I mean, to assign a new person, you click add a new JEP. And oh, sure, you can click the installation, you'll have to click the funding type, you'll have to click the role, and then you save it, and you'll add one at a time. He's got 78 JEPs that you would have to do that for. So in this particular case, what you'd want to do is globally replace him with somebody else who is new. And if I pick this person, it will pull all these JEPs off. I'm not going to do it because Josh would be mad. It would pull them off and put them onto Armentrout, Jeff Armentrout's account. And then Josh would have no JEPs. So that is a really slick way to move JEPs and reassign them without having to do them one at a time, which is very tedious. I was gonna stop here. Finally, DSMOA community, how to find your contact information. Here, you use this button up here, and you can see here's our state financial managers, state POCs, that's me. Or well, actually, I stand corrected. Here is where I am. Here is our USACE team here. Over here is where you can get a hold of the components. And you just click here, and here's all their contact information you need. The alternates are listed here as well. So if you do need to reach out to them, this is where you're going to go to get their phone number or their email address. And then finally is DocStore. There's just a lot to this portal. It is a very highly functioning platform that we use that seems to serve us pretty well. This is where we go and we post everything that has to do with our cooperative agreements. And we have all the way when the portal started getting stood up to current. And for state POCs, if you are getting ready to build, we'll say, for example, you are getting ready to compile the application for 2628, you can come here and you can look at the current application to see what was posted previously and kind of reference that. Otherwise, you can see all of the well, there's not many because we just awarded in July 1, but we've already done a couple of mods and the agreement itself. Oh boy, I'm done, Brian. I went as fast as I could. So that's it. And so there's more to come in training later. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian. And thank you all very much.
Yeah, and we'll jump really quick, and you all can give Katie a big hand. Thank you so much for all the great information. And she also got you out of the final test. Held on, but yes, thank Katie for getting you out of your final test. I just want to drive home. I have 3 more slides, I promise. So collaboration, probably the most important part of DSMOA is we're really looking for a collaborative process. So we encourage that collaboration throughout the entire process, including the setting up of a JEP. And the goal is for each POC to collaborate with their counterparts across all the steps. As you could tell through the portal, there's a lot of places where we have to interact with each other, and that only happens with knowing each other and collaborating. And then understanding our roles. So we need to know what our roles are in DSMOA, and do you know your counterparts and who they are and the last time you interacted with them. So hopefully that's relatively soon, or that was relatively frequent in the past, right? And we would like for you to be interacting with them soon. For many projects that are ongoing that we've had daily interactions, this almost is second hat that we're doing this. But for some projects that are brand new, or new installations that get it, or a new floods project that gets stood up, then that may be a brand new contact, and we need to bring in a new set of SMEs and resources to look at the project. So collaboration, very important. Next slide, please. Redima's probably trying to hit the next slide button. So for more information, here's where fact sheets, the fact sheet, I believe we actually sent you a version of this fact sheet, but here's the actual link to it on the DSMOA. Please go look for that information there. In addition, if you already have access to the DSMOA portal, there's a lot of information, as Katie highlighted. You go all the way back to 2006 and find some of the original documentation that goes with the portal. Next slide. And then thank you. So, and I've included the form for the survey, and hopefully you won't get it after us too much for being 15 minutes over, but I really do appreciate you all taking the time and your efforts to stick with us for the last 15 minutes. It's been great. I think we started off, I think our max I saw was a little over 4:15, and now here we are 4 hours later and I still 2:08. I'll take it. That's a win. I know it's hard to sit through 4 hours of a presentation like this, but I really do appreciate you all sticking with us and coming on. So